If you're dying to see what happens next and want to stay 5 episodes ahead in this series and others, then why wait? Join our awesome community of over 500 members on Patreon, where they're already enjoying the latest episodes right now for as little as $2.50 for your first month. So what are you waiting for? Hop over to Patreon after this video and get exclusive early access. With that said, drop a like, leave a comment, subscribe to the page, and I'll see you in the next one.
Cross my heart and hope to die. Welcome to my dark side.
The scene shifted to a realm unlike any other, a hidden domain shrouded in mystery, known only as the fourth dimension. It was a place removed from the bounds of ordinary reality, where the very fabric of existence seemed to ripple with untapped power. Here, amidst the infinite void, stood primordial Vegeta, his body radiating an ominous energy that pulsed with newfound strength. Vegeta's form was a testament to his transformation. He was no longer just a Saiyan, but something far more dangerous. His genetic makeup had mutated, merging the blood of the Saiyan race with that of the demons. This wasn't the result of some diluted union, but a seamless fusion that had perfected both lineages. His body now possessed attributes of both species in their purest forms. As Vegeta hovered in the void, his muscles rippled with energy, and his aura glowed with an eerie mix of ki and chakra. This new energy, drawn from the demon race, didn't replace his natural Saiyan ki, but acted as an amplifier, heightening his attacks to devastating levels, while his physical abilities, speed, strength, and endurance remained powered by ki. His energy blasts and special moves were fueled by chakra, creating a deadly synergy. For a moment, he simply floated there, allowing the overwhelming power to settle within him. His breathing slowed as he acclimated to the colossal force coursing through his veins. With a sharp exhale, Vegeta descended back to the battlefield, a world reduced to rubble by his clash with Abaddon, a foe whose defeat had only solidified Vegeta's supremacy. The once majestic mountains were now jagged heaps of stone, and the ground was scorched and fragmented. The air smelled of ash and molten rock, a grim reminder of the carnage. Vegeta landed lightly in the midst of the chaos, his boots crunching against the shattered earth. His sharp, calculating eyes swept across the battlefield, searching for the body of his last known ally, or rival, depending on the day, Broly. The legendary Saiyan had been thrown with incredible force during the battle, his immense power unable to keep up with Vegeta's newfound might, but Broly was nowhere to be found. Vegeta frowned, his senses on high alert. The faint remnants of Broly's energy lingered in the air, concentrated in a single spot amidst the debris. He knelt, placing a hand on the ground where the energy signature was strongest. He was here, Vegeta muttered to himself, his voice low and gravelly. So where did he go? A sudden spike in energy caused Vegeta to stand abruptly. His eyes narrowed as he focused on the disturbance. It wasn't just one source, there were several, and they were coming from beneath the Earth's surface. The energy signatures grew stronger with each passing moment, steadily rising toward him. What is this? Vegeta growled, his mind racing. His sharp senses quickly assessed the situation, counting the approaching presences. His expression darkened as the numbers swelled. How can this be? He muttered. This many? He clenched his fists, the weight of what he was sensing pressing heavily on him. Hundreds of energy signatures were converging in his direction. The sheer number was staggering, especially considering their similarity to the energy of a Saiyan. It's impossible, Vegeta said, his tone laced with suspicion. The Saiyan race was destroyed, annihilated with planet Vegeta. Only a handful of us survived. His teeth clenched as his mind worked furiously. I would have known if so many had escaped Frieza's wrath. The thought of Kaba and the Saiyans from Universe 6 flickered briefly in his mind, but he quickly dismissed it. No, he muttered. This is Universe 7. The battle took place here, unless he trailed off, considering the possibility that Konik, the angel involved in their conflict, might have manipulated their location. But even that didn't explain what Vegeta was sensing. Something about the energy was off. He closed his eyes and focused, allowing the incoming power to wash over his senses. His brows furrowed as he delved deeper into the energy's essence. It's strange, he muttered, his voice low but tense. It feels like Saiyan energy, but it's not. It's the same, and yet it's different. Vegeta's eyes snapped open, glowing faintly with intensity. As he straightened, he felt a cold knot of confusion tightening in his chest. There was no time to dwell on it. The energy signatures were closing in fast. Vegeta turned his head sharply, sensing movement all around him. A moment later, the ground trembled as dozens of figures emerged from the shadows, leaping gracefully down to encircle him. They moved with precision, their landings synchronized as they surrounded Vegeta completely. 50 figures in total now stood before him, their forms bathed in the dim, ominous light of the broken world. Vegeta's gaze swept over them, his sharp features betraying a flicker of shock. It wasn't because they had caught him off guard. He had sensed their approach. No, what unsettled him was their appearance. "These aren't Saiyans," Vegeta muttered, his voice a mix of confusion and anger. "But why do they have the energy of a Saiyan?" The beings before him were unlike anything Vegeta had seen. They were humanoid in shape, but their bodies were covered in thick, coarse fur. Long, muscular tails swayed behind them, their movements deliberate and fluid. Their eyes glowed faintly, reflecting an intelligence that was both primal and ancient. These were the people of the mountain, the guardians of Wukong Mountain. Though they bore a resemblance to the Saiyans Vegeta knew, they were something far older. They were the ancestors, the Oozaru race, from which the modern Saiyan bloodline had descended. Much like prehistoric beasts compared to their modern counterparts, these beings were a primal and untamed version of the Saiyan race. But Vegeta didn't know any of this. To him, they were a mystery, a new challenge to conquer. The 50 figures stood silently, their glowing eyes fixed on Vegeta. The tension in the air was thick, the silence broken only by the distant rumble of the broken earth. Vegeta smirked, his Saiyan pride flaring to life as he raised his fist, energy crackling around him. Vegeta's eyes darted around the circle of beings as the tension in the air grew unbearable. The quiet was suffocating, broken only by the low hum of power that seemed to radiate from these strange warriors. Despite their savage, Oozaru-like appearances, their energy felt unmistakably familiar, yet alien at the same time. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was fundamentally wrong. "Where is Broly?" Vegeta finally barked, his voice sharp and commanding, cutting through the silence like a blade. His gaze scanned the group, daring any of them to answer. The figures didn't flinch, their glowing eyes locked on him with unrelenting intensity. Vegeta could feel their energy swirling, like a storm ready to break loose. He clenched his fists, frustration building inside him. The air was thick with unease, and the lack of answers gnawed at him. His mind churned. Are they my people, or are they not? The thought rattled him more than he cared to admit. If they were somehow connected to his race, then what was he supposed to do? He was a king. No, the king of Saiyans, even if his race had been reduced to a mere handful of survivors. Could he bring himself to destroy them if they truly were his kin? His eyes narrowed as he studied their forms more closely. They resembled the great ape, the Oozaru, but they were smaller, less feral in their movements. Their auras were sharp and disciplined, yet wild at the same time. It was a strange, dissonant energy that made Vegeta's instinct scream that something wasn't right. Before Vegeta could demand answers again, one of the figures stepped forward. His fur was darker than the others, his stature taller and more commanding. The leader, no doubt. "He's here to retrieve the vessel," the figure said, his voice deep and resonant, carrying an air of authority. Vegeta's eyes narrowed further. The word echoed in his mind, setting off alarm bells. "We can't let him take the vessel," the figure continued, his voice rising with conviction. "He is the key to unsealing our god, the Monkey King, Wukong. He's the key to freeing him from this mountain." The declaration sent a ripple through the crowd as the other figures roared in agreement. Their energy flared, the ground trembling beneath their combined power. Vessel. Vegeta's mind raced, his jaw tightened as the realization hit him. Are they talking about Broly? His eyes widened in shock as the pieces began to fall into place. "Broly is their vessel?" he muttered under his breath. The idea was absurd, yet it made a twisted kind of sense. Broly's immense power, his boundless rage, it was the perfect container for something far greater. Before Vegeta could fully process the implications, the air itself seemed to shift. A chilling, malevolent presence swept over the battlefield like a tidal wave. The sky darkened unnaturally, the faint light dimming as though the sun itself had been snuffed out. Then came the voice, "Stand down, if you all value your lives." The words reverberated through the air, deep and commanding, filled with an authority that froze the monkey warriors in their track. Their flaring energy flickered and died as they instinctively obeyed the command. Vegeta felt the hair on the back of his neck rise. The sheer weight of the presence pressing down on him was unlike anything he had ever encountered. His instinct screamed at him to run, to flee, but his pride as the king of Saiyans wouldn't allow it. The darkness deepened, and then In the distance, two glowing eyes appeared, piercing through the void like twin stars. The very sight of them sent a chill down Vegeta's spine. The eyes slowly opened, their golden light illuminating the darkness, revealing the outline of an immense figure. Vegeta staggered back a step, his breathing shallow. This power, it was incomprehensible. It dwarfed anything he had ever felt, including the gods of destruction and even Whis. For the first time in a long time, Vegeta felt fear. The figure stepped forward, its form gradually taking shape. It wasn't flesh and blood, but a manifestation of pure, glowing energy, radiating with cosmic power. Its features were sharp and regal, its body tall and imposing. Though it was only an ethereal projection, it carried an undeniable weight, as though its mere presence was enough to shatter mountains. Vegeta's legs buckled, and before he could stop himself, he dropped to one knee. "What is this?" Vegeta growled, his voice trembling with both rage and disbelief. His pride rebelled against the instinctual reaction, but no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't force himself to stand. His fists clenched tightly against the ground as he struggled. "My body, why can't I move it?" he muttered through gritted teeth. Every time he tried to lift himself, an invisible force pushed him back down. The figure stepped closer, and Vegeta's eyes widened as he took in the full sight of the being before him. It resembled the Monkey King, Wukong, a legendary figure he had never heard of, but whose sheer presence spoke of millennia of untouchable power. But this wasn't Wukong's true form. Vegeta could tell from the flickering energy that this was merely a projection, a fragment of the being's true self. His actual body, and perhaps the bulk of his power, was still sealed within the mountain. And yet, even this fragment was enough to bring Vegeta, the primordial king of Saiyans, to his knees. "What kind of power is this?" Vegeta growled again, his voice strained. He grit his teeth, fighting with everything he had to move, even an inch. But every time he pushed back, the oppressive aura crushed him further into the ground. The figure's glowing eyes stared down at him, unreadable, yet filled with an overwhelming sense of superiority. It said nothing, merely observing as Vegeta continued his futile struggle. The king of Saiyans, a warrior who had defied gods, now found himself powerless before this ancient being. Slowly, the glowing figure tilted its head, raising a hand to stroke its chin thoughtfully. Its piercing golden eyes seemed to bore into Vegeta, analyzing him with a mix of curiosity and disdain. "My, such power," the figure spoke, its voice deep and resonant, echoing as though it were coming from the depths of the mountain itself. "It seems my race has dwindled in my absence." Vegeta's body trembled under the overwhelming weight of Wukong's presence. He clenched his teeth, his pride and fury clashing with his inability to move. "What is this power? Why can't I break free?" The figure took another step forward, its towering form becoming more distinct. "I never thought the mutation I introduced to my people's genes would change their appearance this much." Wukong's gaze sharpened, scanning Vegeta's form from head to toe. His lip curled slightly in disdain. "Why, you look almost human." The words stung Vegeta's pride, though he refused to show it. He tried to rise again, forcing every ounce of his ki into his limbs, but his body refused to obey. "What's going on with my body?" His fists clenched tightly against the ground, veins bulging from the effort. "It's as if I'm moving on my own. No, submitting on my own." The memory struck him like lightning. His mind flashed back to a moment from his childhood, a memory buried deep but impossible to forget. He had seen his father, the proud king of the Saiyans, kneeling in a similar position. The image of Lord Beerus with his foot planted firmly on the king's head burned itself into his mind once more. The humiliation, the rage, it all surged to the surface. Vegeta's teeth ground together as he hissed under his breath. "Such humiliation! I've pushed myself to the brink of death over and over again, broken my body countless times, endured pain no mortal could survive, just to achieve ultimate power. And yet, here I am." He forced his head upward, every motion agonizing, as though invisible fists were slamming him back down with relentless force. His burning gaze met Wukong's glowing form, his pride boiling over. Kneeling before a monkey in a costume? The thought screamed in his mind, but the words never left his lips. Wukong tilted his head slightly, as if amused by Vegeta's defiance. "What do you call yourself now?" he asked, his tone calm yet commanding. Vegeta hesitated, his brow furrowing. The question caught him off guard. His lips parted, but no words came out. What is he asking? What does he mean? "Speak now," Wukong commanded, his voice dropping in tone, carrying the weight of an absolute order. "Huh?" Vegeta blinked, confused and angry. His mind raced. Who is this being? And how does he have this much power over me? But before Vegeta could respond, his mouth moved on its own. "I'm a Saiyan," he said instinctively, the words leaving his lips without his permission. Vegeta's eyes widened in shock. "What?" His mind reeled. "I didn't say that. I didn't choose to speak." "How? Not you," Wukong interrupted, his glowing gaze narrowing as he stared deep into Vegeta's eyes. The intensity of that stare was unlike anything Vegeta had felt before. It was as if Wukong wasn't just looking at him. He was peering into his very soul. Vegeta felt small, insignificant, as though his entire existence was laid bare. "I said, speak," Wukong commanded again, his tone sharper this time. The world around Vegeta seemed to blur. He felt a strange pull, as if reality itself was unraveling. When he blinked, the battlefield was gone. In its place, he found himself in a vast, empty, white room. "What? What is this?" Vegeta muttered, his voice echoing in the void. He looked around wildly, trying to make sense of his surroundings. The stark whiteness stretched infinitely in all directions, disorienting him further. Then he saw it. In the distance, kneeling in submission, was a massive figure, an Oozaru, the great ape of legend. Its towering form loomed in the endless void, its massive fists planted firmly on the ground. Its golden eyes glowed faintly as it bowed its head low, a gesture Vegeta had never imagined seeing from such a ferocious being. Vegeta's heart raced. What is this? Where am I? He took a cautious step forward, his instincts screaming at him to be on guard. The Oozaru raised its head slowly, its glowing eyes locking onto Vegeta. When it spoke, its voice was deep and ancient, resonating with power and wisdom that spanned millennia. "Our race is now called the Saiyan race, Your Majesty," the Oozaru said, its tone reverent. Vegeta's breath caught in his throat, his hands balled into fists as he struggled to process what he was hearing. "What is this?" he demanded. "Where am I?" But the Oozaru did not answer. Unbeknownst to Vegeta, he had not moved from his spot on the battlefield. His physical body remained frozen, kneeling before Wukong. The white room he now stood in was a space within his own mind, a construct created by his imagination, yet tied to something far greater. Within this mental plane resided the essence of the Oozaru, the primal force of the Saiyan race. This was the same space from which the great ape had spoken to Goku during his clash with Zeno, before he had sacrificed himself for Goku. And now, in this moment, the Oozaru had taken control. Vegeta's eyes darted around the white room, panic threatening to take hold. He didn't understand what was happening, but he could feel it, the presence of the Oozaru bearing down on him, not as an enemy, but as something far more unsettling. The Oozaru's voice echoed again. "This is the will of the original Saiyan," it said solemnly, "the power to command its descendants, to bend their will to its own." "A Saiyan," Wukong muttered, his tone thoughtful as he seemed to roll the word around in his mind. His glowing eyes narrowed slightly, as though savoring the sound. "Saiyan, it has a nice ring to it." The ancient being tilted his head slightly, studying Vegeta with a mix of curiosity and amusement. "And what's your name?" he asked, his voice carrying a commanding weight that demanded an answer. Suddenly, Vegeta felt a shift. He blinked, and the white room vanished, replaced by the bleak battlefield before the mountain. His vision sharpened, and he realized he could move his body again. But instead of relief, Vegeta was consumed by something far darker. His fists clenched tightly, and his teeth ground together as his mind spiraled. The humiliation, the memory of being forced to kneel, his body submitting against his will, burned in his chest like molten fire. "Me, the mighty King Vegeta," he spat under his breath, his voice trembling with rage. "I fell to this, to kneel before my enemy like some powerless fool." His pride, a cornerstone of his existence, seethed with fury. Vegeta's blood boiled as he replayed the scene in his mind, his body bowing involuntarily, his every instinct screaming rebellion. And yet, he had been powerless. It was an image that would haunt him forever. Anger erupted within him like a volcano, fueled by years of relentless struggle and the unwavering pride of a warrior. Memories of his father's surface, unbidden and unrelenting. He saw King Vegeta again, kneeling in forced submission before Lord Beerus. Vegeta had vowed on that day, as a child, that he would never bow to anyone, not a god, not a foe, not even death itself. And yet, here he was, forced into submission. "Pathetic," he hissed through clenched teeth. The word wasn't just aimed at Wukong. It was aimed at himself. He barely registered Wukong's presence anymore. Vegeta's thoughts churned with shame, anger, and the burning realization that despite all his power, despite his ascension to a form that transcended both Saiyan and demon, he was still weak. The sky above them began to darken further, swirling with black and purple clouds. Lightning cracked across the heavens, jagged bolts striking the ground with terrifying force. Each thunderous impact sent tremors through the earth, carving scars into the planet's surface. The wind picked up, howling through the shattered landscape with terrifying ferocity. It was no ordinary storm. This was an extension of Vegeta's rage, his energy spilling uncontrollably into the environment. The air itself felt alive with his fury, crackling with power that bent and twisted reality around him. Wukong tilted his head, unfazed by the chaos. His glowing form stood resolute amidst the hurricane of power, his golden eyes observing Vegeta with the faintest hint of intrigue. Vegeta's energy surged as he began to push against the weight that still lingered in his mind and body. To think, after everything I've endured, he growled, his voice low and dangerous. After all I've been through, his fist trembled as his ki flared wildly. I'm still weak. His muscles quaked as he forced himself upward, his body moving with agonizing slowness. The strain was immense, and he felt the presence of the Uzaru inside him, fighting to keep him down. It wasn't just a presence, it was him, a primal version of himself that sought to dominate his will. No! Vegeta roared, his voice shaking the heavens. I won't submit, not to you, not to anyone. His body trembled violently, his muscles screaming in protest as he pushed himself to his knees. The Uzaru inside him surged back, trying to reclaim control. Vegeta's mind was a battleground, a clash of wills between his primal self and the prideful king who refused to bow. Purple and black energy erupted around him, wild and untamed. The destructive aura of Hakai energy mingled with the demonic chakra that coursed through his veins, wrapping around his body like a blazing inferno. The ground beneath him cracked and shattered under the sheer weight of his power. The Uzaru growled deep within his mind, its presence roaring with dominance. But Vegeta's pride burned brighter, a flame that refused to be extinguished. He gritted his teeth and forced his legs under him, his body shaking with the effort. You think you can control me? Vegeta snarled, his voice filled with venom. I've broken my body 1,000 times to rise stronger. I faced gods, demons, and death itself. The Uzaru's influence wavered for a moment, a crack in its unyielding grip. Vegeta seized the opportunity, pouring every ounce of his will into standing. Slowly, agonizingly, he rose to his feet, his aura blazing brighter with every inch. The storm around him intensified, bolts of lightning striking the ground in rapid succession. The wind howled like a chorus of fury, the very planet trembling under the weight of Vegeta's defiance. Finally, Vegeta stood tall, his chest heaving with effort. His aura flared to its peak, a swirling mass of purple and black energy that seemed to tear at the fabric of reality itself. His eyes burned with unyielding determination as he glared at Wukong. I am Vegeta, the king of all Saiyans, he declared, his voice a thunderclap that echoed across the battlefield. And no one commands me. Wukong remained still, his glowing form unflinching in the face of Vegeta's fury. For a moment, there was a silence, broken only by the crackling of Vegeta's energy. The ancient being's golden eyes glinted faintly, his expression unreadable. Interesting, Wukong said softly, almost as if to himself. Wukong's glowing form shifted slightly, his golden staff tapping the ground with a soft echo. His lips curled into a confident smile, sharp and knowing. Oh, he said, his voice laced with amusement as his hand rested on the staff. He's managed to subjugate his great ape. Impressive. Not everyone can overcome their primal instinct. The ancient Monkey King's golden eyes bore into Vegeta, a hint of approval flickering within them. You fought well to suppress it. I'll admit, not many could have resisted the pull of their Uzaru blood. But here you stand, defiant. Vegeta's chest heaved, his aura crackling violently around him. He remained silent, but his gaze burned with unrelenting fury. Wukong's smile grew wider. I am the god of all Uzaru, he declared, his voice resonating with a divine authority that seemed to shake the heavens. And seeing as you carry my DNA, you are part of my lineage. By extension, I am also the god of all Saiyans. He leaned slightly forward, as though savoring the weight of his words. The urge to kneel before me, to submit to my power, is natural. It's in your blood, but you've pushed it down, somehow. The energy in the air grew heavier, and Wukong's gaze darkened. Not bad, he continued, his tone turning sharp, but I'm afraid it's useless. With a thunderous yell, Wukong slammed the butt of his staff into the ground, sending a shockwave through the battlefield. His energy surged, twisting the air around him into a radiant vortex of power. "You may defy me, Vegeta," he growled, "but your other half cannot." Vegeta's eyes widened as he felt the Uzaru within him roar back to life, its feral will thrashing against his control. The beast clawed at the edges of his mind, its presence fueled by the oppressive energy radiating from Wukong. It was then Vegeta understood. The glowing light surrounding Wukong's energy manifestation, it wasn't ordinary. It mimicked the light of a full moon, the same light that triggered the Saiyan transformation into the Great Ape. It wasn't the moon Vegeta was used to, but it had the same effect, dragging the primal beast inside him to the surface. Vegeta's growl deepened, his voice carrying raw defiance. "I will not be subjected to this," he roared, his voice echoing across the shattered landscape. His aura erupted like a tidal wave, the ground beneath him crumbling under the sheer force of his power. "I will not bow to anyone, not to you, not to anyone else." The ground beneath Vegeta sank as the pressure of his power created a massive crater. Jagged fissures spread outward, splitting the earth as bolts of lightning rained from the darkened skies. Each strike illuminated the battlefield in bursts of blinding light, highlighting Vegeta's towering form amidst the chaos. His chakra-infused energy spiraled around him, purple and black Hakai energy flaring wildly. Wukong remained calm, his golden gaze unwavering as he observed Vegeta's outburst. My, he said with a faint chuckle, his tone carrying an air of amusement. "It seems my pride still burns strong in my descendants." Vegeta's rage boiled over, and with a ferocious yell, he launched himself forward. His movements were precise, calculated, and fueled by the raw power coursing through his veins. He thrust both hands behind him, releasing two massive blasts of chakra-infused energy. The twin beams exploded with force, propelling Vegeta forward like a rocket, his speed nearly doubling from the momentum. The air around him cracked as he broke through the sound barrier, his body becoming a streak of purple and black light. The distance between them vanished in an instant, and suddenly, Vegeta was face to face with Wukong. Time seemed to slow in that moment. Vegeta's face was a mask of pure, unfiltered rage. His piercing eyes locked onto Wukong's. The veins in his forehead bulged, and his aura crackled like a storm ready to explode. Every fiber of his being screamed for a fight, for dominance, for revenge against the humiliation he had endured. Wukong's expression, however, was one of utter calm. Confidence radiated from him as his usual smug demeanor remained intact, unshaken by Vegeta's approach. His glowing golden form didn't flinch, his eyes glinting with the ease of someone who had seen countless battles and emerged victorious every time. As Vegeta's energy flared, the moment before impact felt eternal. The air around them grew still for the briefest of instants, the calm before the storm. It was as if time itself has stopped, anticipating the clash of two titans. The Saiyan prince clenched his fist, determination burning in his eyes, though his body was already bruised and battered. Wukong gave an easy smile, twirling his staff, the Ruyi Jingubang, with one hand. The sound of the metal rings jingling echoed softly, a serene contrast to the tension in the air. "I haven't fought in ages," Wukong said casually, his voice carrying a playful undertone. "This is going to be fun." Vegeta's jaw tightened as he remembered the humiliating exchange moments before. He had managed to land a single solid strike, yet Wukong had brushed it off like a mere inconvenience, as if swatting away a bothersome insect. The memory stung almost as much as the throbbing pain in his fist. "Don't get too comfortable," Vegeta snarled through gritted teeth. "I'm only getting started." Without hesitation, Vegeta lunged forward, throwing his right fist with devastating intent. The air cracked with the force of his strike, aiming to break bones and shatter Wukong's smug expression. But Wukong was ready. He caught Vegeta's fist mid-flight, slamming his palm against the Saiyan's knuckles. The clash of their energies created a deafening shockwave. A brilliant flash of purple and gold lit up the sky as the ground behind Wukong erupted, sending chunks of rock and debris hurtling through the air. Vegeta was sent skidding backward, his boots carving deep trails into the rubble as he struggled to stop himself. Wukong lowered his hand and pointed the Ruyi Jingubang at Vegeta. His smirk widened, filled with confidence, yet free of malice. "Show me what you can really do." Vegeta's eyes widened as Wukong vanished in a blur of speed, leaving nothing but a faint shimmer in the air. Cloud-skipping step! Wukong's voice echoed. The Saiyan warrior barely had time to react before Wukong reappeared behind him, staff raised high. Instinctively, Vegeta spun around, crossing his arms above his head, just in time to block the incoming strike. The impact was monumental. It felt as though an entire mountain had been dropped on him. The sheer force drove Vegeta to his knees, the rocky ground beneath him splintering under the pressure. Vegeta roared, pushing back with all his might. He wrenched the staff aside and countered with a furious flurry of punches and elbows, each one aimed with precision and lethal intent. His movements were sharp and calculated, honed by years of relentless training and the blood of a warrior race. Yet Wukong moved with an effortless grace, dodging or parrying each blow as though dancing to an unseen rhythm. His faint smile never faltered, a silent taunt that only fueled Vegeta's rage. Leaping backward, Vegeta clasped his hands over his chest, his fingers moving in a blur as he formed a rapid series of hand signs. Energy began to swirl around his palms, glowing with an ominous purple hue. It spiraled faster and faster, forming twin whirlpools of power. Vegeta thrust his hands forward, shouting, "Chakra Cannon!" The twin energy blasts tore through the air with a high-pitched screech, their destructive power evident in the way they distorted the air around them. Wukong raised an eyebrow, intrigued. He spread his arms wide and called out, "Somersault Cloud Barrier!" A radiant swirl of golden light materialized around him, forming a shimmering dome of energy. The chakra cannons struck the barrier head-on, detonating in a violent burst of purple arcs. The shockwave shook the battlefield, toppling stone pillars and scattering debris. When the smoke cleared, Wukong stood untouched, his barrier still glowing faintly. Interesting, he mused, spinning the Ruyi Jingubang in his hand. Sparks of golden light danced around the staff, as if responding to his thoughts. "But let's see how you handle this." He pointed the staff forward and commanded, "Golden Needle Barrage." Dozens of razor-thin golden beams shot forth with blinding speed. Vegeta's instincts screamed danger. He leaped high into the air, narrowly avoiding the majority of the attack, but two beams managed to graze him. Sharp pain tore through his arm and thigh, leaving trails of blood in their wake. Snarling, Vegeta twisted in midair, gathering energy between his palms. He shouted, "Gallic Gun!" as a massive stream of purple energy erupted downward, aimed straight at Wukong. With a calm expression, Wukong twirled the Ruyi Jingubang, its movement a blur. "Heavenly Extension!" he shouted, and the staff stretched impossibly long, slicing through the Gallic Gun with ease. The attack split in two, its energy scattering harmlessly across the battlefield. Landing gracefully, Wukong rested the elongated staff on his shoulder. "That might have finished weaker opponents," he said with a chuckle. "But you didn't really think a weak attack like that could hurt an immortal being like me, did you?" Vegeta's breath came in heavy gasps. His muscles screamed in protest, and blood dripped from his wounds, but his eyes burned with unyielding resolve. "Who is this guy?" Vegeta thought, his mind racing. "He's barely trying." The battlefield crackled with tension, the weight of immense power pressing down on the shattered ground. Vegeta's chest rose and fell in uneven gasps, his brow glistening with sweat. He hadn't noticed it yet, but his body was changing, adapting. Each time Wukong's strikes connected, Vegeta's demonic blood silently absorbed fragments of the Monkey King's godly ki, weaving it into his own energy like threads in a tapestry. This ancient ability, a hallmark of the primordial demon gods, lay dormant within Vegeta, now surfacing without his conscious awareness. But Wukong stood unfazed, tapping his Ruyi Jingubang lightly against the ground. The faint, almost melodic chime of the staff mocked the chaos around them. "What's the matter, Vegeta?" Wukong teased, his tone casual yet cutting. "Don't tell me you're starting to lose your edge. You Saiyans used to be fiercer than this." Vegeta wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand, his scowl deepening. The Monkey King's words bit into his pride like a dagger. "I'd rather die," he barked, his voice laced with defiance. Retreat was never an option for Vegeta. His warrior's pride dictated that this battle could only end one way, his opponent's defeat or his own. Bracing himself, Vegeta spread his legs into a fighting stance. His aura flared around him, dark and crackling with power. Bolts of electricity raced along his arms, weaving together with the sinister hum of his demonic chakra. The ground beneath him trembled as his energy surged. "Final!" Vegeta bellowed, bringing his hands together. Dark, destructive chakra coiled into his palms, fusing seamlessly with the glowing, ominous light of Hakai energy. The sheer intensity of the gathered energy distorted the air, bending light around him. Flash! The colossal beam erupted from his hands, its force ripping apart the earth beneath it. The massive attack surged forward, a blinding pillar of destruction tearing through the battlefield and roaring skyward. Thunder boomed as if the heavens themselves recoiled from Vegeta's fury. Wukong's eyes glinted with interest as he raised his free hand. "Celestial Palm Bomb!" he called, forming a swirling orb of golden cosmic energy in his palm. With a calm but decisive motion, he thrust the orb into the heart of the final flash. The clash of energies was cataclysmic. A deafening explosion erupted, shaking the battlefield and sending a mushroom cloud of dust and debris into the air. Vegeta shielded his face as the shockwave hit him, its force rattling his bones. For a moment, the entire battlefield seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the smoke to clear. When the dust finally settled, Vegeta's eyes widened in disbelief. There stood Wukong, utterly unscathed, one foot firmly planted on the ground. His Ruyi Jingubang pointed skyward, as if he had simply swatted away the attack. "You actually made me exert some effort," Wukong remarked, rolling his shoulders with a smirk. "Good. Keep it coming." "He survived that?" Vegeta muttered, his voice a mix of shock and frustration. His face twisted with disbelief. "And not a scratch? He really is immortal." But his astonishment was short-lived, replaced by a burning resolve. With a furious snarl, Vegeta surged forward, his boots grinding against the rubble. His strikes came fast and relentless, each blow aimed to dismantle the unshakable Monkey King. Mid-swing, Vegeta disappeared in a blur of motion, reappearing behind Wukong with a fierce elbow aimed at the back of his neck. Wukong pivoted fluidly, raising his staff. Heaven-splitting parry. The collision of Vegeta's elbow against the staff reverberated through his bones. Gritting his teeth, Vegeta pressed forward, driving his knee toward Wukong's ribs. Wukong countered effortlessly, delivering a swift palm to Vegeta's chest that sent him hurtling backward. The force drove the air from Vegeta's lungs, but he could feel it again, the subtle siphoning of Wukong's divine ki into his own body with every strike. Vegeta landed on his feet, skidding to a halt, his fists trembling with frustration and newfound power. He wasn't entirely sure what was happening, but something within him was changing. He couldn't ignore the gradual surge building inside him, dark and potent. Wukong, growing mildly irritated by Vegeta's persistence, spun the Ruyi Jingubang above his head. The staff whistled as it sliced through the air. Then, Wukong's voice shifted into a commanding chant, each word reverberating with ancient power. "Body outside body," he shouted, plucking 2 strands of hair from his head. With a flick of his wrist, he tossed them into the air. In a flash of golden light, the hairs transformed into 2 identical clones of Wukong, each one brandishing their own Ruyi Jingubang. The numbers 1 and 2 glowed faintly on their foreheads, marking them as distinct extensions of the Monkey King. The clones grinned, their auras identical to the originals. They surrounded Vegeta, spinning their staffs lazily, as if relishing the moment. Vegeta's eyes darted between the 3 Wukongs, his fists clenched tighter, his mind racing. 3 of them, he thought, his heartbeat pounding in his ears. This is insane! The battlefield trembled as Vegeta's fierce gaze darted from one Wukong to the next. His sharp instinctual mind assessed his opponents, though confusion gnawed at the edges of his thoughts. They moved in perfect unison, their smirks as maddening as the originals. "Clones? Fine," Vegeta growled, his voice dripping with venom. He clenched his fist, his aura flaring like a violent storm. "I'll take you all on." With a burst of speed, Vegeta lunged at the closest Wukong, the #1 clone, slamming a devastating backhand into its side. The ground shattered, cratering beneath the impact as the clone erupted into a shower of golden sparks. Vegeta barely had time to savor the moment before he felt the whoosh of air behind him. Instinctively, he ducked, narrowly avoiding a strike from the staff of #2 clone. With a roar, Vegeta unleashed his energy in a chaotic wave, his aura exploding outward and knocking both duplicates away. The #2 clone spun through the air, recovering gracefully. Hovering above, it raised its staff, golden flames licking at its edges. "Blazing staff barrage," it bellowed. Fiery blasts rained down in rapid succession, each streaking toward Vegeta with deadly precision. Vegeta crossed his arms to block, his muscles straining as the fiery energy clashed against him. He managed to deflect most of the barrage, but one searing blast sliced across his shoulder. Pain flared instantly, but so too did a twisted, invigorating surge. The dark siphon within him greedily fed on the attack's energy, amplifying his own ki in a dangerous, unnatural way. "Enough!" Vegeta snarled, his voice a mix of anger and determination. His hands moved rapidly into a sequence of intricate hand signs, dark energy swirling violently around him. He thrust his palms forward, shouting, "Dark Gallic Flash!" A wave of purple-black destruction energy tore through the battlefield, carving deep trenches into the earth as it roared toward the Wukong clone. The attack radiated raw, chaotic power, promising obliteration. But then, Vegeta saw it, something that froze his blood. The #1 clone raised a single hand, slapping the incoming wave aside as though it were nothing more than an annoying insect. The attack veered off course, detonating far away in a massive explosion that rocked the distant horizon. "Impossible!" Vegeta shouted, his voice trembling with disbelief. His hands lowered slightly, his body tense. How could they be so strong? What Vegeta didn't yet realize was the horrifying truth. These weren't just ordinary clones. Wukong's technique wasn't like other duplication abilities, which typically halved the user's power across each copy. Wukong's duplicates, formed from strands of his own hair, carried his full strength. They were as powerful as the original, retaining every ounce of his energy and skill. Wukong's laughter echoed across the battlefield, low and smug. He stood calmly, observing the fight as though it were a leisurely spar. In his manifestation energy form, he could only produce 2 duplicates, but in his true body, the Monkey King could summon 1,000 copies, each identical in power. This ability was part of what earned him the title of God Killer. It was also one of the reasons why the gods had feared him, why Zeno himself had deemed it necessary to seal Wukong away before his strength grew too great. "I think I overdid it," Wukong muttered to himself, snapping his fingers. In an instant, the 2 clones vanished into thin air, leaving Vegeta standing alone, visibly shaken. "He's not strong enough to handle even one of me, let alone 3. Wukong tapped his chin thoughtfully, then grinned. Still, I wanted to show off a little. No harm in reminding him that I could end this battle whenever I want. Wukong's voice carried a hint of amusement, but there was something deeper, an ancient, prideful arrogance. Despite his nonchalant demeanor, Wukong was a warrior to his core. He had a history steeped in triumphs, and the pride that Saiyans carried in their veins was something they'd inherited from him. Vegeta clenched his fist, feeling a surge of adrenaline pump through his body. His mind raced, and for the first time in a long while, doubt crept into his thoughts. His confidence flickered like a dying flame as he grappled with the overwhelming power before him. But then, deep within him, the beast roared. The great ape, the primal essence of his Saiyan blood, stirred in his soul. Its voice echoed like a drumbeat in his mind, ancient and commanding. "You must leave a godly impression," the beast growled, its tone both fierce and encouraging. "You are not just a king in name. You are the king of the Saiyans, a god among gods. You can't let it end like this." The words struck Vegeta like a thunderclap. His heart pounded as the beast continued, its voice growing louder. "Every Uzaru dreams of this, to stand before the Monkey King himself, to prove their strength. Don't let this chance slip away. Let me take over, unless you'd rather run back to Bulma." "Get out of my head!" Vegeta shouted aloud, his aura flaring wildly. His voice was a defiant roar, filled with fury and resolve. "Give up?" he spat, speaking more to himself than anyone else. "That's not my style. Just sit back and watch as I annihilate your so-called god." The ground trembled as Wukong raised the Ruyi Jingubang high, its golden surface glowing with an intensity that seemed to pierce through the heavens. His eyes sparkled with mischief as he pointed the staff downward and slammed it into the earth. Heavenly shockwave! A blinding golden ripple surged outward in every direction, tearing through the battlefield like an unstoppable tidal wave. Flames of spiritual energy ignited around Vegeta's feet, catching him off guard. The force of the shockwave hurled him skyward, flipping uncontrollably as he tried to regain his balance. In the blink of an eye, Wukong appeared behind him, a savage grin plastered across his face. "Pillar-crushing strike!" he bellowed, driving the Ruyi Jingubang into Vegeta's chest with the force of a meteor. The impact cracked Vegeta's armor, and he spat blood as agony ripped through him. His body screamed in protest, but deep within him, the dark siphon continued to work its sinister magic, feeding on the godly energy surrounding Wukong and amplifying Vegeta's own ki. Gritting his teeth, Vegeta twisted midair and unleashed a desperate right hook aimed at Wukong's cheek. This time, it landed with a sickening crack, and the Monkey King staggered backward for the first time, surprise flashing across his face. Wiping the corner of his mouth with a thumb, Wukong chuckled. "That's it, Vegeta. You adapt faster than I expected. This is good," he said, his voice a mix of approval and excitement. Vegeta scowled, his breathing labored. Not taking this fight seriously, he muttered under his breath, his frustration mounting. Still clutching his chest as his lungs burned, Vegeta let out a growl of defiance. "I never back down," he declared, his voice unsteady but resolute. Wukong's grin widened as he stepped back, spinning the Ruyi Jingubeng in his hands. "Let's see how you handle this then." He hurled the staff high into the sky, its golden glow brightening until it seemed to merge with the sun itself. With a loud battle cry, Wukong shouted, "Rain of 10,000 rods!" In an instant, the sky filled with countless golden staffs, each shimmering like spears of light. Vegeta's eyes widened in disbelief as the weapons hovered overhead, aimed directly at him. "You've got to be kidding!" Vegeta exclaimed, his heart pounding. The rods began to fall, a deadly rain that turned the heavens into a lethal storm. Vegeta's aura erupted around him as he darted through the barrage, weaving between the golden missiles with every ounce of speed and precision he could muster. He used his arms, legs, and bursts of ki to deflect or destroy those he couldn't avoid. Each rod that struck the ground detonated in a massive explosion, sending shockwaves through the crumbling terrain. The sky and earth seemed to blur together in a chaotic symphony of destruction. Sweat poured down Vegeta's face as he gritted his teeth, every muscle in his body straining to keep him alive. One misstep would mean certain death, yet despite the overwhelming odds, he refused to crumble. Clapping his hands together, Vegeta summoned his dark, destructive energy, the swirling black and purple ki coalescing in front of him. His voice roared above the chaos. "Hakai!" The energy formed a barrier around him, glowing with the sheer power of destruction itself. The golden rods slammed into the barrier one by one, ringing out like metal striking metal. Vegeta pushed harder, pouring more energy into the shield as he braced himself. But then, something happened that left him stunned. His Hakai energy, a power that could erase even spirits from existence, failed to destroy the rods. Instead, the staffs remained intact, pressing against the barrier with unrelenting force. "No way!" Vegeta whispered, his voice trembling as realization set in. When the final wave of rods fell, the Hakai barrier shattered into a shower of sparks. Vegeta stumbled forward, bruised and battered, yet still standing. All around him, the battlefield was littered with craters and fragments of golden staff, a testament to the ferocity of the assault. From high above, Wukong hovered with his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. "I'll admit," he began, his tone carrying a rare hint of respect, "you're one fascinating Saiyan. You even possess the power of those demons, the ones Zeno sought to erase." For a moment, Wukong seemed lost in thought, his gaze distant as he recalled a dark chapter of history. Zeno, in his divine authority, had ordered the extinction of another race, one with overwhelming potential that he deemed too dangerous to exist. The memory lingered in Wukong's mind, a grim reminder of the god's fear of mortal evolution. Meanwhile, Vegeta inhaled raggedly, his body screaming for rest. Yet despite his exhaustion, he managed to smirk. "Is that the best you've got, old monkey?" he taunted, his voice dripping with defiance. Unbeknownst to Vegeta, his body was undergoing a transformation. The dark siphon continued to absorb Wukong's godly aura, blending it with his own power, combined with the passive ability of Ultra Ego, which made him stronger with every blow he endured. Vegeta's strength was growing exponentially. The duality of these powers, destruction and absorption, was creating a new kind of energy within Vegeta. He could feel it surging through his veins, his aura rising with each passing moment. Above him, Wukong's grin widened. "Fascinating," he said to himself. "Let's see just how far this Saiyan can go." Wukong's laugh rumbled across the battlefield, deep and resonant, like the roar of distant thunder. His golden aura flared, casting an almost divine glow over the fractured terrain. "Oh, you poor little subject," he said, his voice dripping with mockery. "You're fighting nothing more than a fragment of me, a mere manifestation, and yet you're struggling." His grin widened and his tone turned contemplative. "If my real body weren't bound beneath that cursed mountain, well, you wouldn't even be a memory by now." He muttered the last part to himself, his confidence radiating like the sun. Before Vegeta could process the taunt, Wukong vanished. The air around him crackled as an overwhelming pressure exploded behind him. "Too slow!" Wukong's voice whispered, just as his fist drove into Vegeta's stomach with the force of a comet. Vegeta's eyes bulged, a guttural groan escaping his lips as the air was forced from his lungs. Blood spattered the ground as his body buckled, but his Saiyan pride refused to let him fall. Shaking, he raised one arm, his hand glowing with charged energy. "Big bang! Attack!" he roared, firing the massive sphere of destruction, ki point blank into Wukong's face. The explosion lit up the battlefield like a second sun, its violent force ripping through the air and tossing both warriors apart. The ground beneath them fractured, sending debris raining down in every direction. Vegeta landed roughly, coughing and clutching his midsection as he forced himself upright. His vision blurred for a moment, but when the smoke cleared, his eyes locked onto Wukong. The Monkey King strode through the dissipating dust cloud, unbothered but not untouched. A faint burn mark marred his cheek, its presence almost laughable against the backdrop of his radiant aura. Wukong touched it lightly, then grinned wider than before. "Well, well," he mused, his voice carrying an amused edge. "You finally landed a solid attack. I'm almost impressed." Vegeta glared at him, his chest heaving. Wukong chuckled. "Ah, yes, learning as you fight, adapting with every blow. That's the Saiyan spirit. I feel almost proud. Even after all this time, my traits still run deep in my descendants." His golden eyes sparkled with pride, though the smirk on his face betrayed his endless superiority. But suddenly, his expression shifted. A flicker of confusion crossed his face as his body shimmered unnaturally, fading in and out of existence like a mirage. He held out his hand, watching it fade and then re-solidify. "What's this?" he muttered, his voice calm but curious. His fingers flexed experimentally as he examined his fading form. "Is this little Saiyan sealing my power?" Wukong chuckled again, though there was a tinge of self-deprecation in it. "How careless of me. It seems my years of imprisonment have left me rusty. To think I've been losing power without realizing it." As he spoke, his golden aura flared anew, and his eyes narrowed with determination. "Ah, now I remember," he said, his tone sharpening. "The dark siphon. Of course, that demonic blood of yours. So it's doing more than just keeping you alive." Reaching up, Wukong plucked a single golden strand of hair from his head. With a flick of his wrist, he tossed it into the air. The strand glowed and twisted, transforming into a new clone of Wukong, identical in every way. The Monkey King snapped his fingers, and his original manifestation body dissolved into golden particles. The clone, now imbued with the full power of the original, stepped forward with a wicked grin. The sheer magnitude of Wukong's ability struck Vegeta like a blow to the chest. This was no ordinary foe. This was a god killer, a being whose very existence defied logic and mortality. What did he just do?" Vegeta muttered, his voice laced with confusion. His fists clenched, his mind racing as he tried to make sense of what he'd just witnessed. Did he just kill himself? The situation was beyond anything Vegeta had faced before, and for a moment, frustration clouded his thoughts. He had come so far, endured so much, and yet this fight felt endless. He gritted his teeth, his Saiyan pride flaring once more. "I've had enough!" Vegeta roared, his voice echoing across the battlefield. Ignoring the pain racking his body, he charged forward with renewed fury. His fists and feet became a blur of motion, every strike fueled by martial arts, precision, and raw desperation. High kicks, elbow smashes, and feints flowed seamlessly together as Vegeta pushed himself to the limit. Between every strike, his body pulsed with chakra, his energy flaring in bursts of dark, destructive ki. He weaved his attacks with deadly intent, each move faster and more ferocious than the last. "Dark Gaelic Flash!" Vegeta bellowed, releasing a massive beam of dark purple energy toward Wukong. The beam roared like a tidal wave, carving through the air with destructive force, but he wasn't done yet. Vegeta's aura erupted once more, and he began to draw in energy from deep within himself. The ground beneath him cracked and split as the raw power gathered in his core. "Take this!" he roared, detonating his final explosion technique. The blast expanded outward in a massive sphere of destructive energy, shaking the heavens themselves. Though he held back just enough to avoid the attack's suicidal consequences, its sheer force was enough to obliterate anything in its path. The Monkey King, Wukong, stood at the center of the chaos, an aura of ancient power radiating from his form. His wild laughter echoed through the broken landscape as he countered Vegeta's attacks with devastating precision. "Eyes of truth!" Wukong bellowed, his golden eyes flaring with an otherworldly brilliance. The shimmering illusions of Vegeta's ultra ego shattered like fragile glass under the piercing gaze. Vegeta snarled, frustrated but undeterred. The Saiyan prince darted around his opponent with calculated speed, subconsciously summoning the devastating power of the dark siphon. Each blow carried the weight of his very essence, and his aura burned like a dark star. But Wukong was always one step ahead. "Body outside! Body!" Wukong called, splitting himself into a perfect clone. The duplicate sprang to life, its movements indistinguishable from the original. Vegeta twisted in midair, aiming a crushing elbow at the clone, but it dissolved just before impact, reappearing at his blind spot. Vegeta spat, spinning to counter with a knee strike, only for Wukong to meet him with a blow of his mystical staff, Ruyi Jingubang. The staff elongated in an instant, slamming Vegeta backward and carving a deep trench into the earth. The battlefield was a wasteland of craters and ruptured earth, the ground unable to endure the magnitude of their clash. Vegeta's muscles screamed as he pushed his body beyond its limit, drawing deeper into the dark siphon. But there was a cost. Its power grew heavier, threatening to consume him entirely. He remembered what had happened to Arak, a god who had once dared to channel this same energy. Arak's body had burst under the strain, despite the combined might of Goku, Gohan, Broly, and Vegeta working to suppress him. Even now, Vegeta felt the siphon testing his limit. Wukong watched him with a smirk, twirling the Ruyi Jingubang in one hand as if it weighed nothing. His energy was like an endless ocean, boundless, ancient, and impossible to measure. Despite Vegeta's relentless assaults, Wukong remained in control, his movements fluid and unyielding. Vegeta roared, his ultra ego form surging with violet flames. His aura spiked dangerously as he charged all his power into one last desperate attack. "This ends now," he bellowed, lunging forward with a punch that carried every ounce of his strength. Wukong caught it, one-handed. The shockwave from the impact erupted outward, splitting the ground beneath them and scattering debris for miles. For a moment, Vegeta's eyes widened in disbelief. Wukong's golden eyes flashed, his grin vanishing into a serious expression. "You've got spirit, Vegeta," he said, his voice calm but commanding. "But spirit alone won't defeat me." With a powerful yank, Wukong pulled Vegeta forward and slammed him into the ground. The impact created a colossal crater, the force rippling through the planet like an earthquake. Vegeta gasped, blood spraying from his mouth as his ultra ego aura flickered and waned. Wukong raised the Ruyi Jingubang high above his head, golden energy crackling around its tip like a miniature sun. "You fought well," he said quietly, the power radiating from him, suffocating. "But you're simply no match for me." For a moment, time seemed to freeze. Vegeta's body refused to move, pinned down by the invisible weight of Wukong's overwhelming power. Pebbles floated upward from the sheer energy radiating in the air. The Ruyi Jingubang descended like a falling star, stopping mere inches from Vegeta's head. Wukong hesitated. His expression shifted from disdain to something more thoughtful. With a grunt, he slammed the staff into the ground beside Vegeta, instead of delivering the final blow. The impact alone was enough to send cracks racing across the shattered earth. "You have potential," Wukong said, stepping back. His shimmering golden figure began to flicker, like a flame in the wind. "But you've still got a long way to go." Vegeta coughed violently, his chest heaving as he struggled to lift his head. Blood dripped from his mouth, staining the broken ground beneath him. "I guess this is all I'm capable of," he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. "I gave it everything I had, and still fell short." His head drooped, his vision dimming as exhaustion overtook him. "This being, or Zeno, I wonder who's stronger. Guess I'll never know. Goodbye, everyone. Maybe I'll see you all again." His words trailed off as his body collapsed. Pain racked his form, every fiber of his being screaming in agony. He could still feel faint traces of Wukong's godly energy coursing through his veins, mingling dangerously with the dark power of the siphon. It was too much. His vision blurred, and the world around him began to fade into darkness, and then silence. When Vegeta blinked awake, the first sensation to greet him was warmth. It wasn't the searing heat of battle or the comforting embrace of a Saiyan regeneration pod. It was different. His skin felt as though it were submerged in a soothing, hot spring. Steam swirled gently around him, the faint sound of water lapping at the edges of the pool echoing in the cavernous space. He opened his eyes slowly, staring up at a jagged ceiling adorned with glowing, crystalline structures. The crystals pulsed faintly, casting an emerald hue across the chamber, and their light shimmered in the water below. He lifted a hand to his forehead and frowned. The sharp sting of battle wounds was gone, replaced by a dull ache deep in his muscles. "I'm not dead," Vegeta murmured, his voice low and strained, as if testing the reality of his words. His brows furrowed. Where am I?" A voice broke through the stillness, startling him. "Vegeta?" The prince turned sharply, spotting Broly leaning against a smooth stone ledge nearby. Broly's massive frame looked out of place in such an ethereal setting, yet his expression mirrored Vegeta's confusion. "I don't know, Vegeta," Broly admitted, his deep voice calm but uncertain. His piercing eyes scanned the cavern with a wary edge. "But this doesn't look like Earth, at least I don't think so. I can't tell if we're even in our universe anymore." Vegeta rose to his feet, the water dripping from his armor and pooling beneath him. His movements were cautious but purposeful. Broly followed, his towering figure creating ripples in the placid pool. The chamber was vast, with natural stone pillars stretching up to support the jagged ceiling. Flickering torches were set into the walls, their flames casting twisting shadows that danced across the surface of the water. Vegeta's mind raced, fragments of memory flashing in disjointed bursts, black lightning coursing through his body. Pain so intense it drowned out thought, and then nothingness. "What was that?" Vegeta muttered, his voice barely audible. His fists clenched as his mind pieced together the battle with Wukong. He thought back to the energy he had felt, a dark and alien force, yet disturbingly familiar. His eyes narrowed as realization began to dawn. "That energy, it felt like my own," he whispered, almost to himself. His mind turned inward, recalling the sensation of power surging within him during the fight. Was I subconsciously absorbing his energy? Vegeta's gaze darkened. His instincts screamed at him, warning him of something dangerous, something primal. He thought of his ultra ego, the form that allowed him to grow stronger with every blow he endured. But this was different. This power didn't just make me stronger, it was siphoning his strength. It felt like those ancient demon techniques, the dark siphoning those primordial demon gods were said to wield. They grow stronger while their enemies weaken. A flicker of pride crossed his face, quickly replaced by irritation. I could feel so much energy building within me, but my body couldn't handle it. His frustration gave way to thoughtfulness. If I could control that power, master it, my strength would rival even the gods. He turned his gaze upward, his jaw set. But that monster, whoever he is, his power is unlike anything I've faced before. Reaching his level will take more than just strength. Before he could contemplate further, a new presence demanded his attention. At the far edge of the chamber, a group of figures emerged from the shadows. They were tall, their furred bodies rippling with lean muscle, and their long, swishing tails were unmistakable. They resembled primitive Saiyans, their broad, simian faces giving way to humanoid forms. Despite their rugged appearance, there was an undeniable air of intelligence in their sharp, observant eyes. The group moved cautiously, and at their head was an older figure, his fur dark and weathered with age. He leaned heavily on a staff, carved with intricate patterns that seemed to shimmer faintly in the torchlight. His eyes, deep and wise, bore a weight that spoke of untold battles and ancient wisdom. Vegeta's eyes narrowed, his posture immediately tense. "There it is again," he muttered under his breath. "That Saiyan aura." The older figure stepped forward, his movements deliberate and unhurried. The staff tapped softly against the stone floor as he approached. The group behind him stood at the ready, their stances wary but not overtly hostile. Vegeta took a single step forward, his voice cold and commanding. "Who are you people?" Vegeta scanned the chamber, his sharp eyes darting across every shadow and flickering torchlight. The memory of the golden being, Wukong, flashed vividly in his mind, his fists clenched at his sides. The battle had been overwhelming, and the idea that such a powerful creature had bested him left a bitter taste in his mouth. "Where is he?" Vegeta bellowed, his voice echoing through the cavern as he shot to his feet, water cascading from his body. His sharp tones startled the group of furred beings nearby. But the moment he realized he was completely naked, Vegeta's face twisted in embarrassment, and he immediately sank back into the water. "Shh," he grumbled, crossing his arms over his chest. The elder furred figure stepped forward, his carved staff tapping softly against the ground with each measured step. He inclined his head slightly toward Vegeta, a gesture of both respect and acknowledgement, though his gaze kept shifting to Broly, who stood silently with a confused frown. "I am Gorok," the elder said, his voice deep and resonant. "Leader of the Uzuru tribe. Your ancestors, in a way. Though not precisely, as we are still alive, as are you." His lips curled into a brief smirk at his own wordplay before continuing. "This mountain is our sacred home and the prison of our deity, Wukong." Vegeta's brow furrowed, but it was Broly who spoke first. "Our ancestors?" he asked, his tone cautious as his eyes scanned the cavern once more. "Don't tell me. Am I in the past again?" "Oh no," Gorak said with a dry chuckle. "You are not in the past. Both of you are in an entirely different dimension. A dimension known as the Fourth. It is a small realm, one that exists as a prison surrounding Wukong's mountain." Gorak's expression darkened slightly, his staff tapping the ground for emphasis. "This prison was constructed to contain our deity's immense power, and when that angel, Konik, attempted to manipulate the environment using his spatial warping ability, it was tampered with by Wukong. Instead of the destination that Angel intended, all of you were transported here." Vegeta's eyes narrowed sharply. "That fool Konik," he muttered under his breath. Gorak continued, undeterred. "I suspect that in his desperation, Konik underestimated the interference of Wukong's power. The fact that you survived the transition and battle proves the extraordinary strength both of you possess." Broly nodded slowly, though his expression betrayed his lack of understanding. "I see," he said, his voice hesitant, "even if none of this makes sense to me." Vegeta, however, focused entirely on the name that Gorak had mentioned. "Wukong," he said aloud, his voice cold. "You mean that golden beast I fought?" He ignored the part about ancestors. It didn't matter to him. What mattered was power. And these furred beings clearly had Saiyan blood in their veins. He could sense it. Their energy wasn't identical to the Saiyans of his time, but it was close, reminiscent of the primal energy they exuded during their great ape transformations. "Yes," Gorak replied simply. Vegeta's expression hardened. "That monster fought me and nearly tore me apart," he spat, crossing his arms. "Where is he now? And why am I still alive? For a moment, I was certain he'd finish me." Gorak stepped closer, his movement slow but deliberate. His chest bore deep scars that told of countless battles. He met Vegeta's intense gaze with one of equal gravity. "Master Wukong's true power is sealed within this mountain," Gorak explained. "A prison created by none other than a being you may know as Zeno." "What?" Vegeta's eyes widened as the name struck him like a thunderclap. He clenched his fists, muttering under his breath. Could he mean our Zeno? His thoughts raced. If that's true, then the answer is clear. Zeno's strength surpasses even Wukong's? He closed his eyes, his thoughts shifting to another familiar face. "Then how are we supposed to defeat Zeno himself?" "Kakarot," he called out silently, almost reflexively. "You'd better still be alive. If you've died, I'll find a way to bring you back just so I can kill you myself." Gorak's voice broke through Vegeta's spiraling thoughts. "What you faced was only a fraction of Wukong's spirit," he said firmly, a sliver of his energy allowed to manifest briefly. "After your battle, he vanished, and you collapsed under the overwhelming force of the God Ki you siphoned from him." Vegeta tensed, the memory of the black lightning and the chaotic energy tearing through him, flashing vividly in his mind. The weight of it all, the power, the pain, the darkness, it had been unbearable. And yet, to think I was defeated by a being trapped in a prison? Vegeta said bitterly, his voice low and sharp. His fists tightened at his sides, and his glare was as hard as the stone walls around him. "And I call myself a king. Pathetic." The elder's steady gaze lingered on Vegeta, unflinching and serene, as if he could see through the Saiyan prince's pride and frustration. Gorak's voice was calm, but carried the weight of history itself. "Do not feel ashamed, Vegeta," Gorak said, his tone almost fatherly. "You have done tremendously well, better than any could have expected. You fought against the father of all Uzuru, the origin of our power and the Saiyan race. Without him, we wouldn't exist." Vegeta's jaw tightened, the compliment doing little to soothe his pride. He crossed his arms, but remained silent, his mind churning with questions. Gorak continued, his voice turning colder. "But do not think we saved you and your companion because of some bond we share as a race. Our intervention was not out of kindness or kinship. We stepped in because Master Wukong took an interest in you both. Particularly," he paused, turning his gaze to Broly, "in him." Broly's brows furrowed deeply, his confusion growing with every revelation. "Me?" he asked, his voice hesitant. His eyes darted between Gorak and Vegeta, searching for clarity. Vegeta glanced at Broly briefly, but said nothing. He, too, wanted answers. "Wait," Broly said, his voice more urgent now. "Where are we exactly? You said this isn't Universe 7, but then mentioned this fourth dimension. What does that even mean?" Gorak hesitated for a moment, his weathered fingers tightening around his staff. Finally, he nodded. "Technically, you are still in Universe 7, he began. But Wukong Mountain transcends the normal laws of space. Zeno himself ordered the mountain uprooted and hidden away in this makeshift prison, where Master Wukong could remain sealed for eternity. This hidden space exists outside conventional time, what you call the fourth dimension." He gestured to the cavern walls, his staff tracing arcs in the dim light. "Long ago, our people stumbled upon this place by accident, or at least, that is what we thought. In truth, I believe we were guided here by the Monkey King himself. His energy called to us. Over time, our ancestors built an entire civilization around the seal that keeps him trapped." Vegeta listened intently, his expression a mix of skepticism and reluctant curiosity. "Because some among our people carried traces of Wukong's DNA and energy," Gorak continued, "he was able to momentarily regain a fraction of his power. He used that power to create this small dimension around the mountain, inside the hidden space of Universe 7, a shield of sort, concealing all life within from Zeno's gaze. To the Great Overseer, all here appears normal, undisturbed." Broly's eyes widened at the revelation. "Trapped forever?" he repeated, his voice tinged with disbelief. Gorak nodded gravely. "Yes, when Zeno discovered that Master Wukong could not be erased, not even by the dreaded eraser ability, he resorted to this, a prison, an eternal exile. And over the countless millennia, the rest of our race was scattered, hunted, and nearly destroyed. We are what remains." He paused, gesturing toward Broly and Vegeta. "But it seems some of our kind managed to survive, somehow, which is why you stand before me now. You, the last remnants of what you call the Saiyan race, are also descendants of Wukong's legacy." Vegeta's lip curled, his thoughts racing as he processed the elder's words. His mind, sharp and tactical, turned over the implications. "So," he muttered to himself, "this is the origin of the Saiyan race." Gorak's ears twitched slightly at the comment, but he didn't address it. Instead, Vegeta's piercing gaze shifted back to the elder. "You keep calling this Wukong a deity," he said, his voice skeptical yet probing. "Are you saying he's some kind of god? Like the Super Saiyan god?" Gorak tapped his staff against the ground, his expression inscrutable. "In a way, yes, but to call him simply a god would be an understatement." "Yes!" Broly suddenly exclaimed, his voice echoing through the cavern, his fists clenched as memories flooded back. "Like Yamoshi," he said, his tone filled with certainty. He had met the real Super Saiyan god during his accidental journey to the past, and knew firsthand the power such a being could wield. Gorak tilted his head slightly, his lips curling into a knowing smile. "Well, yes and no," he said, his voice measured. "Wukong is indeed a deity, but he wasn't always one." Vegeta's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean by that?" he asked, his sharp tone making it clear he wasn't in the mood for riddles. Gorak tapped his staff against the stone, the sound reverberating softly. "I don't claim to know the full truth," he admitted. "What I do know comes from the Book of Legends, a text written by Wukong himself. You might recognize its descendant, the sacred texts used by the Namekian people." "The Namekian people?" Broly asked, his brow furrowing. "Yes," Gorak replied. "The Namekian text is technically a copy, one written by Zalama, the creator of the Dragon Balls, who was inspired by the original. Zalama sought to leave something for his people, just as Wukong did for ours. He tailored the teachings to the Namekians, but the roots of the stories, the truths about the Saiyan race, remain within." Vegeta raised an eyebrow. "And where is this so-called original book now?" Gorak sighed. "It was left in the care of my direct descendants," he explained. "I entrusted it to them hundreds of thousands of years ago, long after I stumbled upon this place. The knowledge of Wukong's history and the origins of the Saiyan race were too precious to be lost. My descendants ensured it survived. Until now, I suspect." Broly's expression shifted as the pieces clicked into place. His time-traveling mind raced, snapping back to the stories he'd heard during his travels. The elder Namekian who once spoke of the Book of Legends had claimed it had been passed down through his family. It made sense now. Gorak was the ancestor of that elder. "So that's why the Namekians know so much about the Saiyan race," Broly muttered, almost to himself. "It all traces back to Gorak." Vegeta, arms still crossed, shot Broly a curious glance. Are you going to share your thoughts, or are you just going to stand there muttering? Broly ignored the jab, his mind fixated on one detail. But there's something strange about it, he said slowly. The book I saw, there was a being in it who looked just like me. How is that possible if the text is so ancient? Gorak gave Broly a knowing look, but didn't immediately answer. Instead, he shifted his attention back to Vegeta. You wanted to know more about Wukong, didn't you? He asked, his tone almost teasing. Very well. Listen closely. Both Saiyan warriors leaned in slightly. Their curiosity piqued. Gorak planted his staff firmly into the ground, his voice growing deeper and more resonant as he began to weave the tale. Wukong was not born a deity, Gorak explained. He was once like any other Saiyan, powerful, ambitious, and driven by an insatiable thirst for strength. But unlike most, his obsession went beyond mere power. He sought immortality. Vegeta's eyes lit up, and he unconsciously leaned forward. Immortality? He repeated, his voice low. Gorak nodded. Yes, Wukong's obsession consumed him, pushing him to uncover ancient techniques and forbidden knowledge. His journey took him to realms beyond comprehension, where he challenged gods, demons, and entities that defy mortal understanding. And through his relentless pursuit, he ascended. He became something more, a being of primal energy, the source of all Saiyan power. The cavern grew eerily quiet as Gorak's words hung in the air. The flickering torchlight cast long shadows, making the chamber feel alive with the echoes of the story. Broly clenched his fist, his eyes burning with a mix of awe and confusion. If Wukong is so powerful, he asked hesitantly, why was he sealed away? Why would Zeno see him as a threat? Gorak's face darkened. Power is both a blessing and a curse, he said gravely. Wukong's strength became uncontrollable, his ambition boundless. Zeno feared what he might become, what his influence might do to the balance of the universes. And so, the Great Overseer acted, creating this prison to contain him. Vegeta's mind raced. The idea of a Saiyan reaching such heights, surpassing even the gods, ignited a spark within him. If Wukong achieved this level of power, he said slowly, then it means there's no limit to what a Saiyan can become. Gorak's eyes gleamed with approval. Exactly, he said. Our race was never meant to stagnate. We are warriors born from the essence of the cosmos itself. Wukong proved that our potential is limitless, but his fate also serves as a warning. Vegeta smirked, his pride bubbling to the surface. A warning I'll gladly ignore, he said. If Wukong can become a deity, then so can I. Gorak let out a long, weary sigh, his gaze heavy as if burdened by the weight of untold millennia. He leaned slightly on his staff, his voice steady but laced with sorrow, as he began to recount a story that had clearly been passed down through countless generations. You ask who Wukong is? He said, his tone solemn. So listen well. Long before planet Vegeta existed, before the Saiyan race, as you know it, even took shape, Master Wukong was a servant to a power far greater than anything you can comprehend. He served at the side of Zeno's father, the first king of all, a being whose power dwarfed even Zeno's. Vegeta and Broly exchanged a look, both too intrigued to interrupt. Gorak's words painted a picture that was almost impossible to imagine. He was chosen, Gorak continued, to be the next guardian of the newly crowned king of all, Zeno himself. But his rise to prominence was not welcomed by all. The ancient gods, beings that predated Zeno, grew envious. To them, Wukong was unworthy of such an honor, given his origins and the way he ascended to godhood. Their jealousy twisted into hatred. Gorak's knuckles tightened around his staff, his eyes burning with a deep-seated anger. The gods conspired against him, threatening his people and slaughtering countless innocents. They thought they could intimidate him into submission. They thought wrong. Vegeta smirked faintly, a flicker of admiration crossing his face. Let me guess, he said dryly. He didn't submit. Gorak shook his head. No, he didn't. Wukong fought back, unleashing his power in ways that defied the laws of creation itself. He hunted down those gods, one by one, and slaughtered them all. Every last one. Broly's jaw dropped. He killed gods? Yes, Gorak said firmly. And he did more than just kill them. He absorbed their power. The abilities, the strength, the essence of every god he vanquished became his own. Because of this, he became known as the God Killer. For a moment, the cavern was silent. Even Vegeta, as prideful as he was, felt a chill run through him. The idea of one being cutting down entire pantheons of gods was beyond anything he had encountered, even beyond anything he thought possible. That's insane, Broly breathed, his voice barely above a whisper. Gorak nodded gravely, his expression darkening. It was a power unmatched, but it came at a cost. The remaining gods twisted the truth, filling the young Xeno's ears with lies. They convinced him that Master Wukong sought to overthrow him, to take his place as the next king of all. And Xeno, still a child at the time, eager to prove himself worthy of his title, began to believe them. Vegeta's brow furrowed. So the gods manipulated Xeno into turning against Wukong, he said. Typical cowards. Precisely, Gorak said, his voice tinged with bitterness. But it wasn't just manipulation. Xeno saw the truth of Wukong's power. Power so vast that even the dreaded eraser, Xeno's ultimate technique, could not affect him. Wukong had gained so many abilities from the gods he killed that he had become immune to even Xeno's might. Broly's eyes widened. So, if Xeno couldn't erase him, what happened? Gorak's gaze lowered. A battle broke out. The greatest battle the cosmos had ever seen. Wukong faced Xeno himself, and for the first time in his life, he was defeated. Vegeta scoffed. Let me guess, he said. Xeno didn't win that fight alone. Gorak gave a slow nod. You are correct. Xeno had help from a being Wukong once considered a brother. This being was none other than Zalama, the very creator of the Dragon Balls. Zalama was one of the ancient beings who had survived alongside Wukong during their service to Xeno's father. Vegeta's eyes narrowed. Zalama. So even the Dragon Ball creator turned against him. With Zalama's assistance, Gorak continued, Xeno managed to overpower Wukong, but even then, they couldn't kill him. Wukong's immortality was absolute. He had immortality upon immortality, layers of invincibility stacked atop one another from the gods he had absorbed, and he couldn't be erased. The only solution was to seal him away. Broly frowned. That's why he's trapped here, he said slowly, piecing it together. Yes, Gorak confirmed. Xeno and Zalama created this prison, binding Wukong to this mountain for all eternity, and he should have destroyed us, his people, as well. But even in his defeat, Wukong performed one final miracle. Vegeta leaned in slightly, his curiosity growing. What kind of miracle? Gorak smiled faintly. He mutated our genes, he said. He altered the very essence of our beings to ensure that some part of his lineage, of our people, would endure. And he went further still, creating this dimension to shield us. This realm concealed all life within it, so that even Xeno would sense nothing amiss. To the king of all, it would seem as if this place didn't exist. The cavern fell into a deep silence, the gravity of Gorak's words pressing down on the two Saiyan warriors. Vegeta and Broly stood frozen, their expressions grim as the weight of Gorak's tale pressed down on them. For a moment, neither spoke, both lost in the magnitude of what they'd learned. Their people, the Saiyan race, had endured endless cycles of suffering, betrayal, and destruction, stretching back eons. Vegeta's fists clenched at his sides, his sharp gaze fixed on the ground. Even to this day, he muttered, his voice low and bitter, we're still suffering. Our original home, planet Salada, was destroyed. We were subjugated by King Cold, then by his wretched son, Frieza. His voice grew quieter, tinged with pain. And even our new planet, Planet Vegeta, was obliterated, wiping out 98% of our race. Broly glanced at Vegeta, seeing the rare vulnerability in the proud prince's eyes. For Vegeta, a Saiyan king, the weight of their people's endless misfortune hit harder than it ever could for Broly. Vegeta's shoulders tensed as he continued, more to himself than anyone else. Our people, they've never known peace, and now they never will. A heavy silence lingered, broken only by the distant sound of water dripping from the cavern walls. Then, Vegeta turned to Gorak, his expression hardening as he forced his emotions aside. He was a warrior, and warriors sought answers, not pity. What about the Uzaru? Vegeta asked suddenly, his sharp tone cutting through the air. That beast, the great ape we transform into. Why does it speak to me as if it's something separate, yet still part of me? His gaze narrowed. Why does it even exist in the first place? And do your people still have the Uzaru transformation? Gorak chuckled softly, the sound echoing in the vast chamber. Ah, the Uzaru, he said, amusement flickering in his ancient eyes. Now, that is a story. Before he could continue, Broly stepped forward, his voice eager and insistent. We have time, he said firmly. He too wanted to know more, not just about the Uzuru, but about the millions of years old book that seemed to feature him. The pieces of the puzzle were coming together, but the answers still eluded him. Gorak inclined his head, acknowledging their determination. Very well, he said, his tone growing serious once more. He planted his staff firmly into the ground and began. This all began thousands of years after Wukong's imprisonment, Gorak explained. Master Wukong, even from within his prison, sought to merge his divine blood with mortal flesh. He experimented with ways to pass his power into a physical form, a host capable of bearing his immense strength. Vegeta's eyes widened slightly, his mind racing. So, you're saying the Uzuru form is part of that experiment? Exactly, Gorak said. Our entire Uzaru race, and eventually, you Saiyans, are the result of that mutation taking root in our bloodlines. Over generations, Wukong's divine DNA intermingled with mortal genetics, creating a powerful, adaptable race of warriors. But as you might have noticed, your forms are more human-like than ours. Broly frowned. Why is that? Gorak gave him a faint smile. Because with each new generation, Wukong's DNA grows weaker. The further removed a child is from his essence, the less they resemble their primal ancestors. But make no mistake, the power is still there, lying dormant. Vegeta folded his arms, his mind working furiously to connect the dots. So, Wukong created the Uzuru to act as a vessel for his power? Yes, Gorak confirmed. He needed a body that could withstand his essence. If he ever had the chance to escape this prison, he would require a host strong enough to contain him. The elder's expression darkened, and his voice grew heavy with foreboding. Every 1,000 years, the seal on this mountain weakens for just a moment. Not enough to break, but enough to reset itself. The prison reforms and strengthens over time, adapting to the eons to ensure its eternal hold. Vegeta's eyes flicked upward, scanning the cavern as if he could see the invisible seal. And during that moment of weakness, he asked, his voice low. During that moment, Gorak said, Master Wukong is able to send out a fraction of his essence, a sliver of his power. He uses it to search for any survivors of his bloodline, any who still carry traces of his legacy. The elder paused, his eyes meeting Broly's with a piercing intensity. But then, something unexpected happened. That fragment of Wukong's power didn't just spread, it was reborn. It manifested fully in a single child. Gorak's voice grew reverent as he said the words, the one you call the legendary Saiyan. Broly's stomach churned as the elder's words sank in. He shifted uneasily, his fists clenching and unclenching at his sides. Legendary, he murmured, his voice quiet. You mean like me? Gorak gave a solemn nod, his staff steady in his hand, as he prepared to reveal another devastating truth. Yes, he said, children born with Wukong's direct, untainted DNA often displayed terrifying power, but that power came at a cost. They couldn't control it. They were consumed by berserk rage, losing all sense of self, and before they could ever mature, they either destroyed themselves or were put down by those who feared them. Vegeta's sharp gaze flicked toward Broly, the realization dawning in his mind. So that's why you have such insane potential, he said, his voice steady but edged with curiosity. And maybe even why Kale, that Saiyan girl in the other universe, shows the same symptoms. Broly's eyes widened as the weight of the explanation hit him. His voice rose in a mixture of disbelief and fear. I've always felt like I was out of control when I transformed. Wait, he shouted, his breathing quickening. You're telling me it's because of some god's power in my body? That it's his essence that's driving me mad? Before Gorak could reply, Vegeta's arms crossed over his chest, and he cut in with a cool tone. Well, you learned to control it, thanks to us. Gorak inclined his head toward Vegeta, his expression calm. And that is precisely why you're still alive, he said softly. You did what none before you could. You tamed Wukong's essence. You are the first truly successful vessel, the only one capable of harboring his mind and power without being destroyed. Broly stared at Gorak, his expression torn between disbelief and dread. Vegeta, he began, his voice trembling. This is all crazy, right? But when he turned to the prince, Vegeta's face was distant, his eyes locked in his own swirling thought. Finally, Vegeta let out a harsh laugh, sharp and bitter. So what you're saying, he said, his voice rising, is that our entire race is nothing more than an experiment, a glorified breeding project designed to free this Wukong? His words were spat like venom, his anger palpable. Gorak's expression didn't waver. He met Vegeta's fury with a calm, steady gaze. Yes, he said, without hesitation. It was Master Wukong's only hope. He had to ensure his lineage continued, hoping that one day, a child would be born strong enough to endure his divinity. Gorak's eyes narrowed. That child, in theory, could help him escape this eternal seal by challenging Zeno's rule. Vegeta's fists clenched, his teeth grinding audibly. Selfish, he snapped, his voice echoing through the cavern. That's what he is. He didn't do any of this for his people. This whole plan, this so-called protection of our race, it's all just a cover for his real goal. Even after billions of years, nothing has changed. His only goal is to escape this prison. Gorak's brow furrowed, but he remained calm. Call it what you will, he said evenly, his voice taking on a more commanding tone. Even if his motives were selfish, without him, our people would have been wiped from existence. The gods would have erased us, and none of this, none of you, would have ever been born. So watch your tongue, boy. Vegeta's head snapped toward Gorak, his glare fiery. But before he could speak, Gorak continued, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. You may be the king of the Saiyan race in this era, Vegeta, but Master Wukong is the god of all Saiyans. You would be wise to remember that. The air grew thick with tension as Gorak's words hung in the cavern. Vegeta's lips pressed into a thin line, but he said nothing. Broly shifted uncomfortably, his thoughts racing. He looked between Vegeta and Gorak, his mind returning to something Gorak had mentioned earlier. He swallowed hard, his fists clenching at his sides. Wait, he said suddenly, breaking the silence. You said the only way to break the seal is to kill Zeno? Gorak turned his gaze toward Broly, his eyes sharp. That is correct, he said. Broly's jaw tightened as he looked past the rising tension in the room, his mind fixated on the enormity of the task. His voice lowered, almost as if he was speaking to himself. That's easier said than done, he muttered. Zeno is immortal. At first, I thought it might be possible, but now his voice trailed off as his shoulders sagged slightly, his eyes clouded with doubt. Vegeta glanced at Broly, but said nothing. Broly clenched his fists, his voice breaking the silence once more. How? How can anyone kill an immortal being? He whispered. The question hung in the air, unanswered, as the reality of their situation weighed heavier than ever. Gorak's voice carried the weight of ages, his tone both somber and resolute. Yes, he agreed, his gaze sweeping over Vegeta and Broly. At least, that was how it seemed, impossible. Until now. The elder straightened slightly, his staff tapping against the stone floor as he fixed Broly with a piercing gaze. Many believed Master Wukong's efforts were futile, but you, Broly, you're different. You tamed the legendary Berserk form, something no one else has ever done. Not only that, but you've unlocked more of the Monkey King's power than anyone before you. His voice softened. You give us hope. You make us wonder if impossible can truly be challenged. Vegeta scowled, the lines of his face hardening in frustration. You want us to kill Zeno? He spat. His voice was sharp, but underneath it, there was a glimmer of something deeper. Perhaps doubt, perhaps rage. That's the whole reason for this rebellion, to break free from the rule of deities who treat us like pawns. Zeno could wipe out everything with a flick of his wrist, just because he's in a bad mood. Broly's arms crossed as he nodded. So we want the same thing, he said, his voice quiet but firm. But like I said before, it's easier said than done. Vegeta glanced at Broly, his expression unreadable, and the larger Saiyan continued. You couldn't beat Wukong, Broly said bluntly. Even if I had joined the fight, we still would have lost. And that wasn't even his true strength, just a fragment of his power. He sighed, his fists clenching. The point is, if we couldn't defeat a fraction of Wukong, how can we defeat Zeno? He beat Wukong at full strength. The chamber fell silent as Broly's words hung heavily in the air. Gorak's expression hardened, his eyes gleaming with conviction. And that, he said, is precisely why you need Master Wukong's power. He alone was beyond a race. If you allow his mind to merge with yours, Broly, you'll gain access to his power, all his abilities. You may even surpass the gods themselves, perhaps enough to do what no mortal has ever done. The room seemed to darken for a moment, as the enormity of Gorak's words settled over them. Broly stared at his hands, flexing his fingers as if he could see the dormant power within. He thought back to the monstrous heights of rage he had once succumbed to, the uncontrollable fury that felt like it would tear him apart. "You're saying," Broly said slowly, his voice trembling, "if I bond with Wukong's consciousness, I'd become strong enough to defy Xeno?" Gorak knelt down on one knee, lowering his gaze to the cold stone floor. "Yes," he said, "this has been Master Wukong's plan since the beginning. He knew that the vessel, his chosen successor, must be protected and guided at all costs. In the end, Broly, you achieve what you've always wanted. And Master Wukong achieves what he's always wanted, freedom." Vegeta's eyes flared with anger, his hands tightening into fists. "And what about me?" he demanded, his voice sharp. "Why save my life? If all you need is him, why bother with me? He's the vessel, right?" Before Gorak could answer, another furred warrior stepped forward, his expression stern. "Because Master Wukong manifested himself specifically to challenge you, Vegeta," the warrior said. "He showed interest in your strength, and he chose to leave you alive. We believe that means your presence is important in some way." The warrior's eyes flicked to Broly for a moment before returning to Vegeta. "Perhaps your power will help Broly unlock his potential, or perhaps you'll play another role entirely. We do not claim to understand all of Master Wukong's thoughts, but we know this much: you are important to his plan." Vegeta let out a low, frustrated grunt, his teeth grinding audibly. "Great," he said sarcastically. "So I'm here because that blasted monkey sees me as a tool, a puppet he can use for whatever scheme he's cooked up." Broly stood silently, his gaze shifting across the glimmering water of the chamber. His hands hung loosely at his sides, but his fingers twitched with tension. "I never imagined," he began, his voice quiet. "I never imagined my whole life was set up by someone I've never even met." He shook his head, his expression a mixture of disbelief and anger. This is a lot to take in." "Indeed," Gorak said softly. His tone was sympathetic, but there was a firmness beneath it, a sense of inevitability. He stood, his staff in hand, and looked directly at Broly. "But you must decide, Broly. Will you choose to let the Monkey King inhabit your mind? Will you embrace the power needed to face Xeno? Or will you deny him and lose the chance to defy fate?" Broly didn't respond immediately, his fists clenched at his sides as he stared at the ground, lost in thought. Gorak continued, his voice resolute. "No matter what you decide, we Uzuru will protect you from all threat. For if you die, Master Wukong's last hope dies with you." Broly's chest tightened as his mind raced with conflicting emotions. He thought of all the times his rage had spiraled out of control, the times he became a danger not just to his enemies, but to the very people he cared about most. The memories cut deep, and a flicker of fear crossed his face. I don't know how I feel about sharing my body with someone else," Broly admitted, his voice heavy with uncertainty. "The whole idea feels weird." He looked at Gorak with wide, searching eyes. "If I agree to this, he can't take over my body, right? I won't lose control of myself again. I won't." "You don't have to worry about that," Gorak assured him with a calm, steady tone. "That's not how it works. Master Wukong will not control your body. He will inhabit your mind, yes, but only to guide you, to help you unlock and wield his power. Think of it as having a mentor inside your head, like a system in one of those video games I've heard about. A voice giving you instructions as you progress." Vegeta shot Gorak a skeptical glance, but said nothing, choosing instead to listen intently. Gorak continued, "You and Master Wukong share the same goal. Once Xeno is defeated, the seal will be broken, and the Monkey King will leave your body. He will return to his own form, using what we call the Speak Method, a process perfected over millennia." Broly looked down at his hands, his mind spinning with possibilities. "Wukong's power," he murmured. "It nearly destroyed me before. But if I could truly harness it, if I could control it, then maybe," he hesitated, his gaze shifting to Vegeta. "Vegeta, you've seen Xeno's strength firsthand. Is there any other way?" The question hit Vegeta harder than he cared to admit. His frown deepened, and his arms crossed over his chest as he stared at the ground. Memories of Xeno flooded his mind. Memories of that childish, all-powerful deity, capable of wiping out entire universes with a flick of his finger. Every fiber of his Saiyan pride rebelled against the thought of ever bowing to Xeno again. "It's your body," Vegeta said finally, his tone reluctant but honest. "Do what you feel is best. Xeno's power, it's absolute. If Wukong really did defy the erase, then maybe, just maybe, he holds the key." His lips curled into a scowl. "But make no mistake, this is madness." Broly tilted his head, surprised by Vegeta's uncharacteristic lack of defiance. "You wouldn't do it, would you?" he asked quietly. I don't like relying on anyone else's power, Vegeta said sharply. I've always trusted in my own strength to get the job done. But that's me. He glanced at Broly. You've always been different. If you think this is the way forward, then take it. Gorak stood taller, his expression firm. Madness, perhaps, he admitted. But it's the only hope our people have clung to for millennia. He swept his arm around the chamber, gesturing to the assembled warriors. Generations of Uzaru have waited in secret, nurturing this plan, hoping for the day Master Wukong might escape. And now, that day depends on you two. One to carry the bond, and the other to, who knows? Vegeta rolled his shoulders, the motion sending water trickling down his muscular arms. Well, I'm not about to let some ancient monkey overshadow me, he said, stepping out of the pool and onto the solid stone floor. His voice carried his usual confidence, but there was a fiery determination beneath it. If Broly's going to take Wukong's power, I'm going to push my own limits too. Can't afford to let him surpass me again. Behind him, Broly rose from the water, droplets rippling in every direction as he straightened his massive frame. The faint glow of the hot spring lit his face, reflecting both uncertainty and resolve. I didn't ask for any of this, he said, his voice low but firm. But if it's the only way to protect my friends, if it's the only way to save Chalet, he paused, his hands clenching into fists, then I'll do it. He looked up, his gaze hardening as he addressed Gorak. I'll become the vessel of Wukong, but hear me now. If I feel even the slightest attempt to control me, to take over my body, I'll rip him out of me. His voice dropped, carrying a chilling edge. Even if it means killing myself to do it. A deep rumble reverberated through the cavern walls, sending a faint vibration beneath their feet. It could have been the mountain settling, but it felt ominous, like a warning from the earth itself. The Uzaru warriors stepped aside silently, their furred forms creating a path for Vegeta and Broly to walk onto the dry rock floor. The chamber's faint, mystical glow illuminated the two Saiyan warriors, casting their faces in sharp relief. Their expressions mirrored one another, grim, yet filled with reluctant determination. Gorak inclined his head respectfully. Then remain here for a time, he said. The mountain is a complex labyrinth, and its energy is deeply tied to Wukong. We will guide you, train you, and teach you how to expand his connection. Vegeta scowled, his arms tightly crossed as he leaned against the chamber wall. His sharp eyes flicked toward Gorak. Train us? Don't assume you can teach me anything, he said with a sneer, though there was a hint of reluctant acceptance in his tone. But if you're right about this plan, I guess we don't have a choice. Broly stood nearby, his hulking frame tense. His gaze lingered on Gorak's aged yet commanding presence, searching for answers he still couldn't articulate. I have 1,000 questions, he admitted, his deep voice carrying a rare uncertainty. But I'll do what I must. Gorak gave a solemn nod, his features illuminated by the soft light of the torches around them. All your questions will be answered in time, he said calmly. Once the transfer is complete, you will understand everything, for you will become Master Wukong himself. His memories, his thoughts, his power, all will be shared. But there is one thing we ask. He leaned forward, his gaze piercing. Do not reject him, for if you do, all of this will have been for nothing. A heavy silence filled the chamber, each moment feeling stretched and weighted with unspoken tension. Vegeta's jaw tightened, his pride warring with the unsettling truth of what lay ahead. His thoughts drifted back to the overwhelming power Wukong had displayed, the sheer savagery and control that even he, the prince of all Saiyans, couldn't match. It was a bitter reminder of his limits. Broly, meanwhile, wrestled with a swirl of emotions, excitement, fear, and a determination that rooted itself deep in his soul. He couldn't deny the dread gnawing at him, but he couldn't turn away either. His promise to protect those he cared for burned in his mind, guiding him forward despite his doubts. Together, Vegeta and Broly followed Gorak as he led them deeper into the labyrinthine halls of Wukong's prison. The corridors were ancient and worn, their walls carved with intricate symbols and faded depictions of long-forgotten events. Each step seemed to echo with an ancient power, as if the mountain itself bore witness to their journey. Eventually, they arrived at a circular chamber. The room's walls were adorned with elaborate carvings, depicting a majestic, ape-like figure standing tall against gods, shaping worlds, and unleashing cosmic destruction. Torches lined the walls, their flames casting shifting shadows that made the images seem alive. At the chamber's center lay a sunken platform, etched with strange patterns, swirling lines and sigils glowing faintly, as if waiting for something. Stand there, Gorak instructed, pointing to the center of the platform. Broly glanced at Vegeta, who merely shrugged and stepped aside, his arms still crossed. "It's all you," Vegeta muttered. Taking a steadying breath, Broly stepped onto the platform. The sigils beneath his feet began to glow brighter, a soft golden radiance spreading outward like ripples on water. "This place," Gorak began, his voice reverent, "is the Convergence Nexus. It is here that our master's essence first touched the mortal realm. To complete the bond, Broly, you must open your mind. Let Master Wukong in." Broly hesitated, his stomach knotting as anxiety twisted his thoughts. Could he truly go through with this? His mind flashed with memories of Chile, her kind smile, and the quiet moments they shared away from the chaos of battle. Gritting his teeth, he clenched his fists. "It's all for power," he said under his breath. "For them." Raising his head, Broly's gaze locked with Gorak's. "I'm ready." Gorak raised both arms, his voice rising in a language neither Vegeta nor Broly recognized. The air in the chamber seemed to shift, vibrating with an otherworldly hum that sent a chill through the air. The torches flickered wildly, their flames bending as if pulled toward the Nexus. Suddenly, golden motes of light began streaming from tiny cracks in the stone walls. The glowing particles swirled around Broly, forming a widening spiral of luminous energy. The air grew thick, almost suffocating, as the swirling light intensified. Vegeta watched from the edge of the chamber, his posture tense and ready to act if something went wrong. His sharp eyes tracked every movement, the warrior in him unwilling to let his guard down, no matter how ritualistic it all seemed. Broly gasped as the light made contact with his skin. The sensation was overwhelming, not pain, but an immense rush of energy and memories that nearly brought him to his knees. Images flashed through his mind. Titanic battles fought on distant worlds, primal roars that echoed across the cosmos, and the unyielding presence of a figure who refused to bow to gods or kings. It was as if the entire weight of Wukong's existence, millions of years of power, knowledge, and will, was flooding into him. The intensity made Broly's heart pound in his chest. For a fleeting moment, fear clawed at him, threatening to overtake his resolve. But then, a voice broke through the chaos, a voice both alien and familiar, deep and commanding. "At last, we meet face to face," the voice said, resonating within Broly's mind. Broly's eyes snapped open, glowing faintly with the swirling golden energy around him. He staggered, his breaths heavy as the presence settled into his consciousness. It felt as though another being was inside him, not just a presence, but a second mind, a mind as vast and unrelenting as the universe itself. Broly stood at the center of the glowing platform, his chest heaving as the voice reverberated through his mind. It was deep, commanding, yet strangely steady, like the presence of a being who had seen and endured countless lifetimes. Wukong. The name echoed in Broly's thoughts as he tried to steady himself. He swallowed hard, his hands trembling as he wrestled with the overwhelming sensation of sharing his consciousness. He managed to say, his voice uncertain. The voice responded smoothly, tinged with an almost amused tone. "Don't worry. I can't take over your body, even if I wanted to. My role is only to guide you, to show you how to access and wield the power already within you. My power is vast, beyond anything you've imagined, but it isn't something you can simply tap into because of shared DNA. It must be learned, unlocked, piece by piece." Wukong's voice carried a calm authority as it continued. "Even the power you've inherited from me has its limits. For now, you are only as strong as my manifestation, the same manifestation that fought Vegeta. And you must understand this. You are not immortal. My immortality is tied to my body, not my mind. Your endurance is finite." Broly listened, his brow furrowing as he tried to absorb the words, but his focus wavered under the surging energy coursing through him. "You should also know this," Wukong went on. "Some of my abilities will be yours to wield, but not all of them. For example, I can create 1,000 duplicates of myself, each as strong as the original. You, however, can only manage 2, and even then, they will be at half your strength. What's more, they will only last for 5 minutes before dissipating, and you must wait 2 hours before creating more. These are just a few of the restrictions you'll have to navigate." The explanation was clear, but Broly wasn't fully listening. He was too consumed by the sheer power rising within him. The golden light swirling around him intensified, spiraling outward until it cracked the walls of the dimension itself. Energy burst free, surging into Universe 7, radiating like a beacon across the cosmos. Broly's eyes blazed as he threw his head back, shouting into the chamber. "Such power!" His voice echoed, his body vibrating with raw energy. He looked to Vegeta, his face splitting into a wide grin. "Look at me, Vegeta! I'm far above you now!" His laughter was wild and unrestrained as his aura flared, illuminating the chamber with golden brilliance. Vegeta raised an arm to shield his eyes, gritting his teeth as the radiance became blinding. "What is this?" he muttered, straining to look at Broly through the intense light. When the glow finally receded, Goku stepped back, his posture reverent as his eyes widened in awe. Broly stood at the center of the platform, chest heaving, but his expression was serene, as if a chaotic storm inside him had finally stilled. His form had changed entirely. His once untamed green aura had transformed into a shimmering silver flame, his muscles defined, but not overly bulky. Long silver hair cascaded down his back, and his fur, now also silver, glistened faintly in the chamber's light. Broly had ascended into a new form, Super Saiyan 6, a transformation only one other being, Wukong himself, had ever achieved. Vegeta's eyes narrowed as he studied Broly. "So this is the power of Wukong's bloodline," he muttered under his breath, his fists clenching reflexively. Slowly, Broly opened his eyes. A faint golden glow lingered behind his irises before fading. He spoke, his voice quieter but laced with a new confidence. "He's inside my mind," Broly said, glancing at his hands. "I can feel him, his memories, his anger, his resolve. It's like he's been waiting for this moment for so long, waiting to speak." Vegeta approached cautiously, his body tense and ready for anything. "Broly?" he called out. "You?" Broly remained silent for a moment, then turned to Vegeta with a sly smile. "No," he said, his voice dropping into an ominous tone. "I'm Wukong now, and talk about giving me this body. Your friend? He's gone." Broly let out a low, sinister laugh. Vegeta's heart sank, and his body instinctively dropped into a fighting stance. "What?" he barked. "What have you done? Broly, answer me!" Before Vegeta could take another step, Broly burst out laughing, his booming voice filling the chamber. "I'm kidding, Vegeta," he said, his grin widening. "It's me. Relax." Vegeta froze, his eye twitching as the tension drained from his body. "What the hell was that?" he snapped, his face turning red with embarrassment. Broly chuckled, his shoulders shaking as he gave Vegeta a teasing look. "Wow, you actually care about me, huh?" "What? I do not," Vegeta shot back, his tone defensive. His arms crossed tightly over his chest as he turned away, his face still flushed. "Don't flatter yourself, idiot." Goku and the assembled Uzaru warriors fell to their knees, bowing in reverence. Their voices echoed in unison, filled with awe and submission. "Welcome back, Master Wukong." Broly's eyes widened, his silver hair swaying as he stepped back instinctively. "Huh?" he said, raising his hands defensively. "Wait, no, it's still me, Broly. Wukong's here, sure, but he can't speak to you directly. He's just in my head. He can hear everything, though, so I guess he heard that." Goku lifted his head slightly, an amused smirk crossing his weathered face. "I know," he said calmly. "Have you forgotten that I was the one who performed the ritual? This is simply my way of showing respect." Broly blinked, his confusion easing slightly. "Oh, right," he muttered. "Okay, enough chatting," Vegeta cut in, his sharp tone snapping their focus. "Broly, it's time to go. Kakarot needs us." His arms crossed as his brow furrowed in thought. "But how are we even supposed to get out of this place? I may be powerful, but my instant transmission can't traverse dimensions." Goku tilted his head, his curiosity piqued, but Vegeta continued. "Well, technically, it can," he admitted, "but it requires someone with significant power on the other side. Someone whose energy is both dimensional and wants to be found." Broly nodded and closed his eyes, focusing inward. "Leave that to me," he said confidently. Within the depths of his mind, he reached out to the presence now residing there. "Hey, old king," Broly called, his tone firm but respectful. "Do you have an ability that can get us out of here?" The voice of Wukong responded almost instantly, tinged with a calm authority. "Of course, I'm a deity, Broly. But why do you ask me? My powers are known to you now. You should be able to summon and use them freely." Broly's brow furrowed slightly as he sighed. "There's just so much," he admitted. "It's like trying to navigate some insanely complex video game." A deep, resonant chuckle echoed in his mind. "Then, let me make it simple. Use this one," Wukong said. "Summon the Nimbus Strike." Broly extended his hand, summoning his energy as the air around him shimmered. A radiant glow appeared in his palm, forming into the shape of a staff, a replica of Wukong's legendary weapon. The staff was sleek yet ancient in appearance, humming with untapped power as Broly gripped it firmly. Above them, the skies darkened without warning. Swirling clouds gathered like a living storm, their inky depths crackling with golden lightning. The wind howled through the chamber, whipping the air into a frenzy. Broly raised the staff high above his head, the tip gleaming as it absorbed the surrounding energy. With a deep, grounding breath, he drove it into the ground with a thunderous crack. The mountain trembled beneath their feet, and the very air seemed to distort as if recoiling from his command. The earth shuddered again, more violently this time. And then it happened. A jagged fissure split open the fabric of reality above them. The rift shimmered with impossible colors, shades of blue, green, and violet, each pulsating with an otherworldly rhythm. The portal radiated a primal energy, its pull almost magnetic. Broly took a step forward, his voice steady as he extended his hand toward Vegeta. "Are you coming?" Vegeta scoffed, brushing Broly's hand aside. "I don't need help," he said curtly, stepping forward with his usual prideful air. Together, they hovered just above the ground, their bodies caught in a strange moment of suspension as the air around them crackled with raw energy. For a single heartbeat, it felt as if they were neither here nor there, existing between worlds. With a simultaneous grunt, they leapt forward into the swirling vortex. As they crossed the threshold, the world around them shattered, time and space folded inward, reality stretching and twisting like molten glass. Behind them, the dimensional crack began to heal itself, the mountain restoring the tear with a slow, deliberate hum. They emerged into Universe 7, their feet landing firmly on familiar ground. But the moment they arrived, the air around them seemed to thicken. The atmosphere pulsed with suffocating energy, like a tidal wave of raw power crashing against their senses. Both warriors instinctively tensed, their eyes narrowing as they scanned their surroundings. The overwhelming surge of energy was impossible to miss, radiating so intensely that even Vegeta's breath caught in his throat. "Do you feel that?" Broly asked, his voice low and taut with unease. Vegeta nodded, his expression grim. "It's coming from the battle," he said. His jaw tightened as he focused on the source of the immense energy. "Whoever it is, they're on another level." The two warriors stood side by side, their senses sharp and their bodies brimming with readiness as the suffocating aura drew them in. "Wait, Kakarot!" Vegeta shouted, his voice booming as he suddenly sensed a familiar energy signature. His eyes widened with disbelief. "You're alive! I knew it!" His fists clenched at his sides, a rare moment of relief washing over him. "You've been helping us all this time, haven't you?" But what Vegeta failed to realize was that time moved differently in the fourth dimension. What felt like mere moments to them could have been much longer outside. Before Vegeta could process it further, his sharp senses caught another presence. He frowned, his brow furrowing in confusion. "Wait, is that Gohan?" he muttered, his eyes narrowed as he tried to make sense of the ki he felt. "No, it can't be. Gohan is dead. But this energy, it's close. Not the same, but too similar to ignore." Broly's deep voice broke through Vegeta's thoughts. "Oh, right. I forgot to tell you. I wished Gohan back to life." "You did what?" Vegeta roared, his voice echoing across the empty expanse of space. His disbelief quickly turned to irritation as he turned on Broly. "How is that even possible? The Dragon Balls were turned to stone after we fought the Grand Priest." Broly shrugged, his expression calm despite Vegeta's outrage. "I used the Namekian Dragon Balls. I made the wish to Purunga when I was sent to the past by Wukong." Vegeta's jaw tightened as he processed this. "Sent to the past? What in the hell are you talking about?" Broly looked away for a moment, his mind flashing back to the strange events Wukong had orchestrated. "It happened when we were fighting the Grand Priest," he said. "You were unconscious. Wukong sent me to the past, but I'm not even sure why." Internally, Broly reached out to the presence in his mind. "Hey, old king," he called. "Why did you send me to the past? What was the point?" Before Wukong could answer, Vegeta cut in again, his frustration palpable. "Unconscious?" he repeated, his arms crossed tightly. "How much happened while I was out? There are too many gaps in this story." Before Broly could respond, both warriors froze as another powerful energy surged into their senses. The sheer magnitude of it forced them to snap their heads toward its source. Is that Piccolo? Vegeta exclaimed, his eyes widening. When did he get this strong? He clenched his fists as he tried to comprehend what he was feeling. He may even be stronger than Lord Beerus. What in the world is going on? Broly's face grew tense as he also recognized the intensity of Piccolo's aura. It felt raw, focused, and battle-hardened. Piccolo's fighting, Broly said, his voice heavy with concern. The realization struck them both like a lightning bolt. They had left Piccolo in charge of protecting their families. Chilai! Broly shouted, his heart pounding in his chest. Bulma! Bulla! Vegeta exclaimed almost simultaneously. Their breaths quickened as the truth became undeniable. Piccolo was fighting, likely to protect the people they loved. But the energy surrounding Goku and Gohan was unmistakable. It clashed violently with the Grand Priest's unparalleled aura. Vegeta clenched his teeth, his mind racing. We can't be in two places at once, he muttered bitterly. Broly stepped forward, placing a firm hand on Vegeta's shoulder. Leave their protection to me, he said, his voice steady with resolve. His eyes gleamed with determination as he looked directly at Vegeta. You and Goku need to focus on the Grand Priest. That fight is just as important. I'll protect your family and mine. For a moment, Vegeta hesitated, his pride and duty warring within him. But when he met Broly's gaze, he saw something unshakable. All right, Vegeta said at last, his voice quiet but resolute. I promised Kakarot I'd come back for him after he sacrificed himself for me. I'll finish what we started. Broly nodded, a faint smile crossing his face. Then it's decided, he said. This is where we part ways, for now. But you better kick that deity's ass. Once I'm done here, I'll join you. Vegeta smirked faintly, his pride shining through despite the situation. You better not die, Broly. You hear me? With a quick motion, he placed 2 fingers on his forehead and focused on the distant energy of Goku and Gohan. Instant transmission, Vegeta called out, vanishing in a blink of light. At that moment, the clouds beneath Broly's feet began to shift, glowing with a faint silver light. The air seemed to hum with energy as one of Wukong's abilities activated. The ground beneath him rippled like water as he prepared to move. Broly glanced upward, his voice low but fierce. I'm coming, Chilai, he muttered. With a sudden burst of speed, he shot forward, the Nimbus strike propelling him toward Piccolo and the danger surrounding their loved ones. Though they traveled in different directions, both warriors carried the same purpose, a fiery determination to protect their friends and families at any cost. The scene shifts to a celestial plane, unlike any mortal could imagine. A vast expanse of shimmering light and swirling energy fills the second dimension, a realm far beyond mortal comprehension. It is here that Kwansei, the wife of the Grand Priest and guardian of the Heart Gem, resides. Within her being rests a jewel of unfathomable power, the key to unlocking the first dimension, a domain housing Zeno's father, the current king of all. Zeno himself is but a successor undergoing his trial for ultimate sovereignty. As Zeno floated in the ethereal space, his once childlike demeanor was now overtaken by an eerie calmness. His small hands, glowing faintly with divine energy, hovered over Kwansei's chest. He murmured to himself, his voice cold and deliberate. All these years of waiting, of orchestrating chaos, and now my patience is finally rewarded. The Heart Gem pulsed faintly, a living, breathing fragment of pure cosmic energy. Zeno's fingers sank into Kwansei's chest without resistance, as if reaching into water. Her calm gaze never faltered, even as her body began to waver like a mirage. With a triumphant pull, Zeno withdrew the Heart Gem, the glowing crystal illuminating his expression of cold satisfaction. The radiant gem thrummed with immeasurable energy, each pulse rippling across the dimension like a heartbeat. Zeno whispered, almost to himself, This will lead me to him. As soon as the Heart Gem left her form, Kwansei's body began to dissipate. Her form unraveled into streams of shimmering light, the energy returning to its origin, the Grand Priest. Her purpose fulfilled, she closed her eyes, a serene smile playing on her lips. It was always meant to be this way, she whispered softly, her voice fading with her form. Zeno watched her disappear with a detached gaze. The time has come, he muttered, turning his attention back to the gem. He tightened his grip, the radiating power making the very space around him tremble. Meanwhile, outside the multiverse in the third dimension, Destruction and chaos reigned where Zeno's palace once stood. The grandiose structure had been obliterated during the battle, leaving behind a smoldering battlefield. Debris floated amidst the cosmic void, remnants of what was once a symbol of absolute power. The Grand Priest floated silently over the ruins, his serene demeanor masking the immense power now fully restored to him. His eyes narrowed as he descended toward Goku, whose body lay motionless on the ground, battered and broken. Suddenly, a flash of movement pierced the smoky haze. "Father!" a voice roared, filled with desperation and fury. Gohan charged forward, his aura blazing like a wildfire. Sparks danced across his tattered clothes as his sheer speed ripped through the air. With a primal scream, Gohan wound up a devastating punch, aiming directly at the Grand Priest's head. The air around his fist crackled with energy, and the ground below buckled under the force of his charge. But the Grand Priest was unflinching. With a single, effortless motion, he caught Gohan's fist mid-swing. The impact sent shockwaves outward, scattering debris and creating a deafening boom. The Grand Priest's grip was like iron, his calm eyes locking on to Gohan's enraged glare. "Such raw power," the Grand Priest said, his voice devoid of emotion. "But power without control is meaningless." With a flick of his wrist, he swung Gohan's entire body like a rag doll, slamming him toward the ground. Gohan twisted midair, forcing himself to land on his feet, but the impact created a massive crater beneath him. Dust and smoke erupted from the ground as the battlefield quaked. Gohan rose slowly, his body trembling from the sheer force of the exchange. His fists clenched tightly as he growled, "I won't let you hurt him." As the Grand Priest loomed over Goku's battered form, his smile widened into something cruel, his words cold and deliberate. "I'm going to enjoy this," he said, his voice calm yet filled with menace. He gazed down at the unconscious Saiyan, his energy rippling faintly. "The Saiyan race doesn't deserve a place in the new world Zeno will create. And it's all thanks to you, Goku." The Grand Priest let the weight of his words linger in the air. His tone turned almost mocking. "Because of you, your entire race will vanish. Not just from the universes, but from every dimension that ever existed. You've doomed them all." His hand curled into a tight fist, an ominous energy beginning to swirl around it. This was no ordinary power. The glow around his fist shimmered with a mixture of Rashi and Kai, a fusion of the two primordial forces of creation and destruction. The air grew heavy, bending and trembling under the strain of this concentrated energy. If this attack connected, it wouldn't just injure, it would obliterate its target entirely from the inside out. The Grand Priest raised his glowing fist high. The space around them seemed to shrink under the weight of his attack. With a motion as swift as it was deadly, he swung his fist downward, aiming directly at Goku's head. "No!" Gohan's voice thundered across the battlefield. He launched himself forward, his aura burning bright as he raced to intercept the strike. The ground cracked beneath his feet as he pushed his speed to the limit. But even at his full velocity, he was too slow. The Grand Priest's strike was moments away from ending Goku's life. At the last possible second, Goku's arm shot up, his fingers closing around the Grand Priest's fist. The clash sent shockwaves rippling through the ground. Cracks spidered out beneath them, as if the planet itself were recoiling from the impact. "What?" The Grand Priest's composure faltered, his eyes widening in disbelief. "How can this be?" Goku's eyes remained closed, his body still appearing lifeless. Yet his grip on the Grand Priest's fist was ironclad. The Grand Priest struggled, but his fist wouldn't budge. Then, without warning, Goku's eyes snapped open, glowing silver and filled with a calm yet overpowering energy. Before the Grand Priest could react, Goku's free hand thrust forward, unleashing a powerful, one-handed Kamehameha. The blazing blue beam roared to life, forcing the Grand Priest to release his trapped fist and leap backward into the air. The energy attack narrowly missed him, rocketing past and exploding into the void of space with a blinding flash. Hovering midair, the Grand Priest's expression turned grim. He observed Goku carefully, his mind racing. This power, how is he still able to access the Omniform after the Aquafoam was extracted? Goku's body began to levitate, rising effortlessly off the ground. Silver energy radiated from him in waves, the heat and intensity causing the space around him to distort. His aura flared suddenly, expanding outward like a living force. The very fabric of reality seemed to crack, and the sky, or what passed for it, tore open, revealing a swirling void beyond. His power stretched infinitely outward, seemingly touching the edges of the universe. "This mortal," the Grand Priest murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. "He truly is something beyond comprehension. But how? How did he manage to maintain this form?" The Grand Priest's mind raced as he considered the implications. He had expected Universe 7 to collapse along with the others once the aquafoam was removed, yet it remained intact. The thought of Vegeta crossed his mind briefly, but he dismissed it. Vegeta hadn't fully mastered the Omniform. No, this anomaly had to be Goku's doing. But how? How did he do it? The Grand Priest wondered aloud, his usually stoic demeanor cracked by the weight of his confusion. Above them, the heavens reacted to Goku's transformation. Blinding silver lightning arced across the sky and tearing through everything it touched. Entire chunks of the battlefield were vaporized in an instant. Even Gohan, standing nearby, had to leap back to avoid being struck by the chaotic bolts. One bolt surged directly toward the Grand Priest. Before he could move, his staff materialized in front of him, absorbing the lightning in a flash of light. The staff, acting on its own, quickly retreated to his side, ready for the next strike. Gohan shielded his eyes from the radiant energy surrounding his father, struggling to process what was happening. The sheer intensity of Goku's transformation was overwhelming. Meanwhile, Goku floated higher, his aura pulsing rhythmically as he examined his hands. His glowing silver hair and eyes reflected the divine energy coursing through him. He spoke softly, almost to himself. "Is this Gohan's doing?" Goku's mind raced as he pieced together the sensation. He remembered the faint energy coursing through him after Gohan had healed him. His son's manipulation of ki had triggered something far beyond what either of them had expected. As Gohan stood frozen, his wide eyes locked on his father's glowing form, an overwhelming mixture of shock and joy surged through him. His mouth parted slightly as he processed the transformation unfolding before him. The air around Goku had changed entirely. His aura wasn't just powerful, it felt alive, stretching endlessly into the cosmos, a manifestation of pure, infinite energy. "This is it," Gohan whispered to himself, his voice barely audible, his fists clenched tightly, his knuckles cracking as hope reignited in his chest. "This is exactly what we needed to turn this battle around." He turned his attention to the Grand Priest, who hovered nearby, his expression as calm as ever, but his eyes sharp with careful analysis. Gohan's heart pounded in anticipation. With Goku's mastered Omniform restored and his own strength at its peak, Gohan felt the impossible was now within reach. Together, they could stand a chance against even the mightiest foe. Goku's transformation wasn't just a miraculous event. It was the culmination of countless forces aligning. What even Gohan didn't realize was that he, through sheer instinct and mastery of ki, had unknowingly played a pivotal role in restoring his father to this state. The process had begun earlier, when Gohan healed Goku during their brief reprieve. At the time, Gohan had drawn upon his immense knowledge and mastery of ki manipulation, a skill honed through relentless training and understanding of the body's inner workings. By transferring his own energy into Goku, Gohan had unintentionally rebuilt his father's damaged cells. It was a precise and delicate act, one that even Whis would have admired, rebuilding Goku's cellular structure from the ground up. The ki lay in the aquafoam, a divine substance that had fused with Goku long ago, intertwining with every part of his being. The aquafoam had chosen Goku, not just as a host, but as its perfect vessel, merging with him down to the cellular level. Zeno's earlier extraction of the aquafoam had removed 90% of its energy, but a trace, hidden deep within Goku's cells, remained. However, that trace had gone dormant. The human body is fragile when compared to divine energy, and Goku's cells had suffered massive damage regulating the aquafoam. To protect both itself and its host, the aquafoam retreated, lying in wait until Goku's life force could sustain it again. When the Grand Priest restored Goku's energy earlier, it only returned his immediate strength. It wasn't enough to awaken the dormant aquafoam. The Grand Priest, though immensely powerful, lacked Gohan's understanding of ki manipulation, and couldn't heal Goku at the cellular level, but Gohan could. His act of rebuilding Goku's cells inadvertently reawakened the Aqua Foam, and now, with Goku's energy fully replenished and his cells whole once more, the Aqua Foam surged to life, intertwining seamlessly with his mastered Omni form. What stood before the Grand Priest and Gohan now wasn't just Goku restored, it was Goku reborn. The Grand Priest observed silently, his gaze sharp, as he pieced together the transformation's mechanics. "So," he murmured, his voice barely audible, "the Aqua Foam, it never truly left him. It burrowed itself deep within, waiting for the right conditions to awaken. And this is the result." He tightened his grip on his staff. "This mortal, he truly is unlike any mortal I've encountered." Meanwhile, Goku floated higher, inspecting his own hands, his expression a mixture of curiosity and awe. The radiant energy flowing through him felt new, yet familiar, like an old friend returned with greater purpose. His glowing white eyes reflected an unshakable calm, and his voice carried a soft but determined tone as he spoke. "Gohan," he said, finally breaking the silence. His son looked up sharply, caught off guard by the steadiness in Goku's voice. "Is this your doing?" Gohan hesitated, unsure of how to respond. "Dad, I just healed you. I didn't." Goku cut him off with a small smile. "Whatever you did, it worked." The Grand Priest's eyes narrowed as he studied Goku intently. His usually serene demeanor was beginning to crack under the weight of his confusion. "This level of power, he's powerful. But," he said with a stern voice. He spoke once more. "It's not anything I can't handle." Lightning continued to dance wildly across the sky, each strike shaking the ground below. Goku, still hovering, clenched his fists experimentally, feeling the energy coursing through him. The sheer power wasn't just overwhelming, it was limitless. "This," Goku muttered, his voice barely above a whisper as he stared at his glowing hands. "This is what it feels like to be complete." And that's it for today's episode, guys. If you watched to the end, then that could be an indication that you enjoyed the series. So please leave a like on the video. Thank you and take care.